As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
You have heard no concepts of morality but the mystical or the social. You have been taught that morality is a code of behavior imposed on you by whim, the whim of a supernatural power, or the whim of society, to serve God's purpose or your neighbor's welfare, to please an authority beyond the grave or else next door, but not to serve your life or pleasure. Your pleasure, you have been taught, is to be found in immorality. Your interests would best be served by evil, and any moral code must be designed not for you, but against you, not to further your life, but to drain it. For centuries, the battle of morality was fought between those who claimed that your life belongs to God and those who claimed that it belongs to your neighbors, between those who preached that the good is self-sacrifice for the sake of ghosts in heaven, and those who preached that the good is self-sacrifice for the sake of incompetence on earth. And no one came to say that your life belongs to you, and that the good is to live it. Both sides agreed that morality demands the surrender of your self-interest and of your mind, that the moral and the practical are opposites, that morality is not the province of reason, but the province of faith and force. Both sides agreed that no rational morality is possible, that there is no right or wrong in reason, that in reason there's no reason to be moral. Whatever else they fought about, it was against man's mind that all your moralists have stood united. It was man's mind that all their schemes and systems were intended to despoil and destroy. Now, choose to perish, or to learn that the anti-mind is the anti-life.
So 6 senior House Democrats sent a letter to President Biden on Saturday urging him to invoke U.S. foreign assistance laws to suspend military aid to Israel due to the country's starvation blockade on Gaza. So this letter said, quote, "Given the catastrophic and devolving situation in Gaza, we urge you to enforce Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act and, as required by that law, make clear to the Israeli government that so long as Israel continues to restrict the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, the continued provision of U.S. security assistance to Israel would constitute a violation of existing U.S. law and must be restricted," end quote. So this section of the Foreign Assistance Act that they are citing says that no assistance shall be given to any country when it is made known to the president that the government of such country prohibits or otherwise restricts the transport of delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. And it says if they restrict it directly or indirectly. And of course, the U.S. knows that Israel is restricting aid shipments. That's why they started airdropping aid into Gaza. That's supposedly why Biden ordered this pier to be built so they could deliver aid from the sea. Israel's blockade and restrictions on aid have put Gaza's population on the brink of famine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently acknowledged that 100% of Gaza's population is experiencing severe levels of acute food insecurity, but the Biden administration continues to provide this unconditional military support. So on Saturday, President Biden signed a $1.2 trillion government funding package that was passed by the House and the Senate at the last minute to avert a partial government shutdown. And so this is, the annual spending bill. It includes the annual military spending bill, which has the $3.8 billion that Israel gets each year. So Israel's still getting that money despite the atrocities that they're committing in Gaza. And this bill also officially cut funding for the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, and this cut comes as Gaza is on the brink of famine. So the U.S. provides Israel with this $3.8 billion in military aid each year under a 10-year memorandum of understanding that was signed by the Obama administration. The $3.8 billion is divided into 2 categories. You have the $3.3 billion in foreign military financing, and that's a State Department program that gives foreign governments money to purchase American weapons. And then there's also $500 million to fund Israeli missile defense systems. So AIPAC, the pro-Israel American lobby group, they celebrated that this money was included in the funding bill that Biden signed. And it's interesting what they said. I'll just read what they put on Twitter. They said, quote, Congress just passed and President Biden signed into law $3.3 billion in vital security assistance for Israel without added political conditions, end quote. So they're happy that there's no conditions, no added conditions. It's still unconditional aid. And then one thing that happened on Friday that was kind of overshadowed by the terrorist attack, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Russia was in a state of war in Ukraine. And that is significant because Russia has always referred to the war as a special military operation. So Peskov actually said that this doesn't mean that there's any legal changes. It's still a special military operation, but he's saying we are in war. It has turned into war for us. He said, quote, we are in a state of war. Yes, it started out as a special military operation, but as soon as this group was formed, when the collective West became a participant in this on the side of Ukraine, it became a war for us, end quote. His comments came as Russia was ramping up missile strikes in Ukraine in what was seen as retaliation for Ukrainian forces stepping up attacks on Russian territory. And I've covered this. There's been a lot of drone attacks, raids by these militants, these so-called Russian volunteers who have been launching ground attacks into Belgrade and Russian border regions, and also the artillery shelling of Belgrade and other border regions. Remember, Russia was saying they're going to evacuate 9,000 children from the border areas. Ukrainian officials said that Russia's missile strikes on Friday were one of the heaviest attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure of the war. They said that 5 people were reported killed and over 1 million experienced blackouts. So the heavy missile strike also comes as Western leaders have been speaking more openly about NATO's involvement in the war. So this also could be a response to all that bellicose rhetoric we're seeing from Macron about sending troops to Ukraine, this really insane stuff. So, and I think we should be very concerned that if Russia determines Ukraine was responsible for a terrorist attack like that, how they could escalate things here. Because if they think if they think Ukraine was behind it, then they think the U.S., the West, NATO was behind it. They could really escalate this. There's also the crackpot theory that it was a Russian false flag, which I've seen from some Ukrainians say that Russia has no reason to do anything like that. I mean, they don't need any pretext to escalate the war in Ukraine. They have plenty of pretext. They wouldn't need a big massacre like this.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
I guess if nothing else, I'd say it's kind of another reminder of how dangerous these situations are, and how the idea of being in a war of choice with Russia is so, again, it kind of reminds me of when those missiles went off in Poland and immediately Zelensky was claiming this was Russia. It was an attack on NATO. People, senators and diplomats around the world were saying invoke Article 5, go to war with Russia right now. And then we find out it was Ukrainian missiles, whether intentionally or not intentionally, that hit Poland. And so everything calms down because it's okay. Ukraine's allowed to attack a NATO country. But you just see for a second there, like, oh, how dangerous this is. Like, what if those were Russian missiles that even accidentally hit Poland? And, oh, wow, we could be in a much worse situation very quickly. Likewise, something like this, you just go, well, look, if this was a U.S. or a U.S. related group, if this was a Ukrainian group, how easily this could lead to some type of escalation. As of right now, we really don't know who did it. It seems that there was some ISIS little group that claimed responsibility for it, but that in itself is hard to know for sure. There are some people who it apparently looks like were caught, which, man, talk about Daryl Cooper posted this. He goes, of all the people I wouldn't want to be in the history of the world, it might be someone who attempted to pull off a terrorist attack and escape in Vladimir Putin's Russia. I don't know who is behind this. I have seen nothing in the realm of evidence presented to suggest who is behind this. It does seem that the Russian government is already hinting at blaming Ukraine for it. They put out a couple statements about how the terrorists were trying to flee toward the Ukrainian border and a couple other statements like that. Now, of course, that doesn't in any way suggest, you can't trust the Russian government any more than you can trust any other government. That doesn't mean it was Ukrainians who did it. That simply means for whatever reason, whether it's because it was Ukrainians or for other strategic reasons, Russia would like to blame Ukraine for this. Probably my guess is that, and this is purely speculation, but my guess is that Russia does not want to have another war on its hands now. They'd probably rather just blame the people they're already at war with, because this is a big enough terrorist attack. I think there were over 100 people were slaughtered. And in that case, someone like Vladimir Putin has to respond in some way. That's the whole appeal of a right-wing strongman, is that they respond to things like this. So anyway, we'll keep our eye on this story. I don't know that there's much more than that, but if you have any thoughts, go ahead, Rob.
I agree 100% that the escalations just aren't good, and that this is why you shouldn't, have quasi wars with people. If you look back, remember that phony news story when they were saying that Putin was paying people who were killing our soldiers
in Afghanistan? Yes, the bounties on the heads of U.S. soldiers. Yes,
right. And it's like, well, what are we doing in Ukraine when we send them gear to go kill Russians? And then you see an escalation like this, where my first thought was, ISIS seems to be this destabilizing force that sometimes even exists in the U.S. interest of destabilizing. And so when I saw the name, I was like, I bet that's going to be us. But then I remember that Putin was in Syria kicking ISIS's ass, so they might have a reason to attack. And then also, even if Russia's saying, hey, this was Ukraine, that could be just to drum up more support for the war in their own country. Sure. So I think this is, in terms of who done it, it's anyone's game.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look, Vladimir Putin is certainly, or at least he's said, I don't know, I shouldn't say he's under the impression, but he has said that he's under the impression that, like, he said this in the Oliver Stone interview, where he said something like, it does seem more convenient that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are always doing the U.S.'s bidding. That's kind of his thing. And right. Of course, as people do know, we do have a history of funding and arming and training these organizations. Now, I think that truth is not quite as neatly tied into a conspiracy. I think that we have funded and armed these groups when we think it's in our interest, even post 9/11, as in Syria. But if you listen, I think basically the whole thing, if you ever listen to John Kerry, who's on that, in fact, let's see if we could find that, Brian. There's the John Kerry hot mic, or maybe hot mic, maybe secret recording. Anyway, I'll see if I can find the recording, but there's this part of it where John Kerry basically says that as they were sending the funding into Syria, they saw the rise of ISIS. And they thought that would put pressure on Assad to cut a deal or step down or something like that. And so they were like, okay, like, we know the money and weapons are falling into ISIS's hands, but like, let's do this because it'll work. And then when ISIS
turned the other way,
they
turned around and went the other way.
That's right. And so when ISIS turned around and invaded Iraq, John Kerry's like, we were all like, what? No, that's not what you were supposed to do. So anyway, much like, there's lots of examples like this, but like things like, when CNN is all like covering for the Summer of Love, and how the riots are the voice of the unheard, and then they start smashing up the CNN building. Like, that wasn't part of the plan. That part wasn't part of what they were going for. But human beings do have agency, and even when you're trying to manipulate human beings toward your end, that doesn't mean they can't turn around and then decide they have their own interests or their own plans. So to me, that's more accurate than just the clear conspiracy of it. However, look, there's no question. Vladimir Putin's had an issue with radical Islamist groups for a long time. And he's certainly killed a whole lot of people in Syria, and he's fought wars in Chechnya and stuff. Like, he's got enemies there, and this is a problem they've had for a while. So it's certainly plausible that could be, they could be the culprits in this. It's just that we don't know yet, but we will find out, hopefully at some point, and we will keep you guys updated on that situation. All right.
Anyways, here from number 6, he's talking about these pretend Federalists. He said some of the advocates specifically. So when people say that the anti-Federalists thought all the Federalists were liars and scammers and tricking them, this is not the case. But there certainly were very powerful ones that took that position. Some of the advocates, I believe, will agree to recommend good amendments, but some of them will only consent to recommend indefinite, specious, but unimportant ones. So he's like, 3 states have ratified by this point, by Christmas of 1787. And so our goal is mostly shifted to, well, what can we do with the proposed system? What can we amend to make it a little safer than what it is right now? Because it's so poorly defined with phrases like general welfare and necessary and proper, etc. And he's saying some of the advocates will be on board. These are some of the Federalists. They'll be on board with giving good recommendations for amendments. Others are going to try to get more poorly defined ones because their goal really is just to scam everybody and then expand power once things are in effect. And that's how things definitely played out, especially in 1791. He said, and this only with a view to keep the door open. So again, some of the advocates are going to recommend, he believes, good amendments. Others, indefinite, specious, and unimportant ones. And this only with a view to keep the door open for obtaining in some favorable moment their main object, a complete consolidation of the states and a government much higher toned, less Republican, and less free than the one proposed. So even though it's being described this way, he's saying, and he said this in previous letters as well, that even though they're describing it this way, we can understand what the legal meaning of these phrases are. People with power are always going to try to find some wiggle room to expand that power. Then he goes into this. The supreme power is in the people. and rulers possess only that portion which is expressly given them. So many of the Anti-Federalists, of course, were in support of a reiteration of part of the Articles of Confederation, basically Article 2, that said any power that's not been expressly delegated to them is automatically reserved to the states or to the people. And so they were really the precursor to what became the 10th Amendment. He wanted limited delegated powers. And then more on that line, he said, the wisest people have often declared this is the case on proper occasions and have carefully formed stipulations to fix the extent and limit the exercise of the power given. Again, you have to be very clear about what they're authorized to do, because as we see all the time now, anytime they have any type of wiggle room, they will always expand their power. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We're all familiar with that phrase, but power always grows. As Abigail Adams so rightly put it, she said, power, whether vested in many or a few, is ever grasping, and like the grave cries, give, give. She understood this, and I think most of the founding generation did. And that's probably why the federal farmer is saying, well, if you're not wanting to be super clear about what's going on here, I can't really trust you. And that's why he's saying some of them were really fake Federalists. In his 7th paper, the federal farmer really focuses heavily on this concept of the people not being represented. It's impossible to represent people. Now, I've read a little bit of Rothbard, too, and I seem to remember something out of that, well, if you have one person trying to claim the interests of 10 different individuals even, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but this is my take on it. But basically, it's really impossible to send somebody over there to properly represent the interests of people because, well, people change their minds and every person is different. Now, you got to get as close to that as possible in a system like this. And, well, if you're one in every 30,000 or so, tens of thousands of people, you're really nowhere close, unless, of course, the society has, well, all the same type of people in it. That's not the place that we are at all today. So in his 7th paper, the federal farmer really focused heavily on this concept of representation, saying that it was totally inadequate and will result because of this in a government based on force. Because if you have 10 people who want a certain thing, but you're only representing, they're only making up like 1% or 10% of the people that are being properly represented of their views in the House of Representatives, in Congress, well, then those people have to live under force. They don't get their views. They don't get any say whatsoever. And this is very similar to the case made by Brutus in his 4th Anti-Federalist paper a few weeks earlier. He predicted that this kind of scenario would lead to corruption and bribery, because the only way to get your stuff done, the only way to get your views through if you're not properly represented, is through bribery. And then you're going to have a lot of corrupt people. It's going to draw those type of people to the top. He said, and rather than resulting in a free government, it would lead to one of consolidation, force, and coercion. So we can see some very strong similarities between the Brutus Anti-Federalist letters and what Federal Farmer wrote just weeks later. But prior to that, even Cato had a very similar take in his 3rd paper. This was in October of 1787. He said that a consolidated government would never be able to properly represent the views of people in different states. And again, that would only result in an institution based on force. And don't you feel that at every point today? Now it's just one side or the other trying to control the entire system. Basically, a handful of people, if you're thinking about just a few hundred people, making decisions for hundreds of millions of people only guarantees that almost everyone is going to be unhappy with their results. Even the people whose team is in charge, they're not happy with their team either. And then when it comes to choosing which team is going to be in charge next round every few years, they're not really for anybody. They generally are using their vote in a defensive manner. Well, I hate these people because they've been awful. I'm going to support these people, even though, well, these people are terrible as well. And maybe they're not even paying attention because they're so against what they have now. If you think about the current scenario, a lot of people, again, I'm going to go back to the Second Amendment, the natural right of self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms. You basically have people thinking that supporting one gun grabber over another is the way to protect the Second Amendment. And this couldn't be further from the truth. It only guarantees that it's going to get attacked more and more and more.
There was a horrible terror attack. I don't know if you saw some of the footage over the weekend, Dr. Paul, but near Moscow. Awful. At least 4 gunmen went into a concert, into a mall, and they slaughtered, now it looks like around 150 people in cold blood. Nasty, awesomely horrific, and then they burned the thing down. So within a few minutes, the U.S. knew who didn't do it. It wasn't Ukraine. It was ISIS. They knew immediately. They immediately had all that information. Ironically, after 18 months, we still don't know who did the Nord Stream 2, but they knew immediately. But I'm just going to throw this out there, Dr. Paul, because let's have a look at Victoria Nuland, who had a hasty exit from government just a few weeks ago. I find very suspicious. Let's listen to an audio. This is Victoria Nuland in January of 22, just before, a few months before Nord Stream was blown up. You might want to put on your earpiece, Dr. Paul, and listen to Victoria Nuland talking about Nord Stream.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, We continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
And a few months after that, Nord Stream 2 did not move forward because it was blown up. But we don't know who did it.
How did she know that?
She's amazing. She's a clairvoyant. And here's what she said just a few days before the terror attack in Moscow. Let's do the first one. There's two of her talking about this. Let's hear this.
Mr. Putin's going to get some nice surprises on the battlefield, and that Ukraine will make some very strong success this year.
So just a few, stop it. So just a few days before this attack, she says Putin's going to get some nasty surprises. And do this next one. She said this, I think in the same week she addressed the CSIS and said, listen to this one, Dr. Paul.
With this money, Ukraine will be able to fight back in the east, but it will also be able to accelerate the asymmetric warfare that has been most effective on the battlefield. And as I said in Kyiv 3 weeks ago, this supplemental funding will ensure Putin faces some nasty surprises on the battlefield.
Just before the
With
attack,
this money,
she says that the money to Ukraine is going to help them with asymmetric warfare, which is what this is, and give him some nice surprises. So, and then boom, here comes the terror attack.
Well, I guess there's no doubt about it. She has been very significant, but we, even before 2014, we talked about her, but really in 2014, we knew what she was up to. She's a promoter of war.
Yeah.
And she's bipartisan. And she comes across as being very fair-minded, saving the world.
Yeah.
What a tragedy.
And we don't know that she's behind this, but we do know that she somehow seems to make great predictions of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, mayhem follows her. So,
but you know, I guess it's the Russian government that paraded some people on a stage and said these guys confessed they did it.
Yeah, yeah, they caught him. I mean, they caught him on their way to Ukraine, but then they said the Ukraine has nothing to do with it. Then why would they be going toward Ukraine? It doesn't make any sense. They
like
said
you say, maybe they'll get to the bottom of it. I always say, if they don't do it now, they still should do it because history can be of some value someday.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a long time for us to wake up. So that's why I think accurate history is so vital.
Yeah, and I would hate to be these guys. Obviously, they were beat up. You know, there's no question about it. The Russians treat terrorist suspects very, very nastily. But we have to remember Abu Ghraib, where we treated people we thought were terrorists pretty badly too. So I'm going to close out with another little bit of kind of breaking news. I didn't mention it to you, but I know that you'd want our audience to hear this. Now, Stella Assange, Julian's wife, just tweeted this out before we started the show. If you can do that last clip, please. She said, this is it. Decision tomorrow, 10:30 a.m., Royal Courts of Justice. She just released this. The Royal Court of Justice is going to make its decision on Julian Assange tomorrow at 10:30 a.m., I guess local London time. So if you are a praying person, I would suggest that might be a good idea. If you have other ways of influencing things, that may be a good idea as well. At the very least, those who aren't either could cross their fingers and hope that justice will be served.
Boy.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Let's hope.
It's a lot better than it was many years. He had to just sit and nobody saying a word about him.
Yeah.
So bringing up the subject of the bill, the financing bill that is threatening all of the Western Hemisphere and the world, the financial system. Spend, no matter how much, trillions and trillions of dollars. But there are some good things that come of it. And I'm being sarcastic. New government spending bill bans U.S. embassies from flying the pride flag. Oh, don't we believe in free speech anymore? You know? But here it is. United States have permitted the pride flag to at the embassies to fly pride flag and the American flag. I'm sure they didn't take the American flag down. Maybe it was down a little bit or something. But it's so crazy. But the Speaker of the House gets credit for it. He negotiated it. He got him to talk. He said, look, we need to get as many votes as we can. And if we do this, we can get some conservatives saying that is a good idea, as if this is the issue. So this is in a rumor mill. You know, I don't think we have this in print, but I happen to believe it probably is true. So he did that. He got a couple people saying, well, this is really good. We can brag about that, and he can get some of his credentials back. But then the end of the story is that the rumor mill said, oh, yes, but don't worry about it. They've agreed to let us, put it back in later on or get rid of it later on, and so that they can fly those flags. And it's sort of in the category of letting these weird foreign leaders come and get the podium in the House of Representatives and represent dignity and democracy and all that. So anyway, keep an eye on the pride flags. They may be going up again. If somebody wants to decorate their house and not damaging to private property next door, let them fly their flag. but not in our embassies. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
6.
Sweep aside those parasites of subsidized classrooms who live on the profits of the mind of others. Sweep aside those hatred-eaten mystics who pose as friends of humanity and preach that the highest virtue man can practice is to hold his own life as of no value. It is for the purpose of self-preservation that man needs a code of morality. The only man who desires to be moral is the man who desires to live. There are two kinds of teachers of the morality of death, the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle, whom you call the spiritualists and the materialists. No matter how loudly they posture in the roles of irreconcilable antagonists, their moral codes are alike, and so are their aims. In matter, the enslavement of man's body. In spirit, the destruction of his mind. Do you think they are taking you back to dark ages? They are taking you back to darker ages than any your history has known. Their purpose is to deprive you of the concept on which man's mind, his life, and his culture depend, the concept of an objective reality. We, the men of the mind, are now on strike in the name of a single axiom, which is the root of our moral code, just as the root of yours is the wish to escape it. An axiom is a statement that identifies the base of knowledge and of any further statement pertaining to that knowledge, a statement necessarily contained in all others, whether any particular speaker chooses to identify it or not. An axiom is a proposition that defeats its opponents by the fact that they have to accept it and use it in the process of any attempt to deny it. My morality, the morality of reason, is contained in a single axiom. Existence exists, and in a single choice, to live.
This weekend's late-night spending vote in Congress seems like another in an endless series of sequels to a bad suspense movie. Just at the brink of disaster, just before the stroke of midnight, Congress pulls off a miracle and passes an omnibus bill to save us from a government shutdown. The heroes have saved the day. Unfortunately, this latest sequel is as bad as the previous ones, as the American people are left with a massive $1.2 trillion spending package to add to our already $34 trillion in debt. Military spending will, of course, be increased yet again, as the military-industrial complex demands more of our wealth to feed its ever-increasing appetite. And if this military spending increase is not enough, congressional leadership is promising another huge supplemental bill to further fuel proxy wars in Ukraine and Gaza, with some money to provoke China as well. Republicans like to talk a good game about reining in spending, especially during an election season. But as we learned with this compromise and all previous compromises, it's all talk. At the end of all the dramatic warnings about shutting the government down, we are left with a Washington-style compromise, meaning the leadership of both parties gets to throw anything and everything they want into the massive bill. Because it is only presented to the rank and file at the last moment before disaster, none of the members get a chance to even read it, much less shape it through the amendments debate process. The Republican House leadership promised the membership 72 hours to read any new bill before a vote, but they broke their promise without hesitation. Members would like nothing better than a chance to read the more than 1,000-page bill, which was worked out in secret behind closed doors. There is likely a reason that congressional leaders did not want members to get the chance to read the bill. As Representative Thomas Massie discovered, buried in the bill is funding for 13-year-old children to get help with gender transitioning without consent from their parents. He also pointed out that although nowhere was it in the authorization bill, just hours after the omnibus passes, the Department of Justice announces the creation of a federal red flag center to attack our Second Amendment rights. Who knows how many more items like these, and far worse, are deeply buried in the must-pass spending bill. Keeping these items from the American people by secretly embedding them in must-pass legislation increasingly looks like a feature, not a bug. No wonder Congress enjoys such a low approval rate among the American people. In the end, the bill only passed the Republican-controlled House with the support of Democrats, fueling a growing rebellion against Speaker Johnson among House conservatives. The media celebrated bipartisanship is not all it's cracked up to be. It means that both parties embrace policies that are leading to our financial bankruptcy. This further threatens the dollar as the world's reserve currency and will result in catastrophic changes worldwide that nearly no one in Congress seems capable of imagining. Republicans capitulating to Democrat demands to save us from a government shutdown may temporarily keep the appearance that this is fine, but in the end, they are making the coming crash all the worse. Thanks for listening.
So last month, Assange's legal team presented its case for the appeal. And so again, this is the decision on whether or not they can do, a formal appeal. And as far as I understand, if this gets rejected, Assange doesn't really have any other legal steps left to fight the extradition. I think there's just one European human rights court they could try to go through, but not sure how binding that would even be in the UK. One thing I mentioned in this story, because I think it's just really important kind of to always bring this up. So during the appeal hearing last month, Assange's legal team did present some new evidence, including a report from Yahoo News that revealed that the CIA in 2017 considered assassinating Julian Assange, according to this report. And they plotted to kidnap him from the Ecuadorian embassy in London over WikiLeaks publishing Vault 7, which revealed CIA hacking tools. And Mike Pompeo was the head of the CIA at the time and was totally furious about it. I think that should be enough to drop the case altogether. So again, we'll see what happens. And this comes after that report that said the U.S. is considering a plea deal for Assange. So we'll see if anything comes out of that. I'm sure both sides are not really discussing it too seriously or considering it too seriously until this decision is made. So what we can do, WikiLeaks has been asking Americans to put pressure on the U.S. by contacting their House representatives and telling them to support H-Res 934, which is a bill introduced by Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona. And this bill calls on the U.S., calls on Biden to drop the charges against Assange. So that's what we could do for our part. Just try to make some noise about this because this is such an important case. This is over the WikiLeaks publishing the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs and State Department cables that Assange received from Chelsea Manning. And that was, his source. He was doing journalism. They're trying to criminalize journalism. And this could set such a dangerous precedent in the United States and around the world, considering Assange is not an American. He's an Australian citizen, and the U.S. is trying to pluck him out of the UK. Trump said in an interview with Israel Hayam over the weekend that Israel made a big mistake by broadcasting images and videos of the destruction in the Gaza Strip, saying that it's losing Israel a lot of support. Trump said in the interview that he was asked basically, what would you do if your family was killed on October 7th? He said that he would have done the same thing as Israel, like basically justifying this horrific war that's happening here. But he has also said that it's time for Israel to finish it, and because of the global opinion is turning against Israel. So Trump said, quote, "You got to get it done, and I am sure you will do that, and we got to get to peace because we can't have this going on. And I will say Israel has to be very careful because you're losing a lot of the world. You're losing a lot of support. You have to finish up. You have to get the job done," end quote. So when asked by the interviewer about how he would respond to the wave of anti-Semitism since October 7th, Trump said something pretty interesting. I'll just read his quote. He said, quote, "Well, that's because you fought back, and I think Israel made a very big mistake. I wanted to call Israel and say, don't do it. These photos and shots, I mean moving shots of bombs being dropped into buildings in Gaza. And I said, oh, that's a terrible portrait. It's a very bad picture for the world. The world is seeing this every night. I would watch buildings pour down on people," end quote. It was interesting because I've been saying that for a while, that people can see with their own eyes what's happening here. And it's not just because of what Israel's putting out publicly. It's also because of the Palestinian journalists on the ground in Gaza. But at the same time, Israel has put out all these videos, of demolitions and stuff. The one thing that's nice about Trump is he sometimes just says things that they're not really supposed to say. Like this. He said, quote, "Some 15 years ago, Israel had the strongest lobby. If you were a politician, you couldn't say anything bad about Israel. That would be like the end of your political career. Today, it's almost the opposite. I've never seen you have AOC +3, these lunatics," end quote. He goes on there, so I'm just going to end it there. But he's saying it's a bad thing that these politicians are now able to speak out against Israel. And it's only a very small number that really do it sincerely. But he's saying it's a bad, like he's not happy about it. But it's just interesting that he said, 15 years ago would end your political career. So Trump said that the Hamas attack on Israel wouldn't have happened if he was still president. That's something he has repeatedly claimed in any interview when he's asked about this. He called Biden, he says Hamas has no respect for them. He's a very dumb person that can barely talk. And I just mentioned at the end of this is one thing he always says is, oh, this would have never happened on my watch. But he was an extremely pro-Israel president. He gave Israel everything that they wanted, including moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli, these Abraham Accords, and all this stuff, and this so-called peace plan that Jared Kushner crafted, that essentially would have formalized the apartheid conditions in the West Bank, and this all played a role into the tensions. So this idea that he was brought peace to the Middle East is not true, because again, this all played a part. And that was the big thing. The Abraham Accords, that was Netanyahu's thing, was basically go around the Palestinians, open up with all the Arabs, and we don't actually have to settle this issue with the Palestinians. We could just keep doing what we're doing, slowly annexing the West Bank through settlements. That was a big part of Netanyahu's plan, which blew up in his face.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Oil prices are going to escalate. They just attacked Israel, just bombed away again over Syria, killed a bunch of people from the World Health Organization and some Iranians. Iran gets involved militarily with Israel. You're going to see Brent crude go to above $130 a barrel, and that's going to destroy the equity markets and the global economy. And we're on the verge of that. And what have we been warning in the Trends Journal for how long? That Ukraine, to get back in the news, to do anything they can, they're going to accelerate their attacks inside of Russia. Oh, wow, what a surprise that 139 people were killed at that concert hall and hundreds seriously wounded, which they're blaming on ISIS, which Russia says is, is more to it than that. And they're blaming Ukraine, the United States, and the UK for being involved in it. Oil prices going up. How about the end of the world going up? Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the little daddy's boy, born on third base and thinks he hit a home run, told an event at Harvard earlier this month, quote, Gaza's waterfront property would be very valuable if people would focus on building up livelihoods. Ready? It's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there. A little bit of an unfortunate situation. They're fucking slaughtering people there. What do you mean a little bit of an unfortunate situation? Some 70% of the people's homes have been destroyed. They're starving. Unfortunate situation. But from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out of there and clean it up and put the Palestinians into the Negev desert. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? A little fucking piece of genocidal shit. And for all you Trump lovers, yeah, Trump was the guy, Jared Kushner's dad, Charles, who Trump pardoned, gave $1 million to a Trump super PAC. This was reported in August by Business Insider. Charles Kushner, the father of Donald Trump's son-in-law and the recipient of one of the former president's final pardons, donated $1 million to the Trump super PAC. Kushner's pleading guilty in 2004 to a host of federal charges, including witness tampering and tax evasion. In one of the most salacious aspects of the case, Kushner hired a sex worker to lure his brother-in-law and then sent the video of their encounter to his sister. This is the fucking prick. This is the Kushner family. Hey, what are you going to build, a Trump Tower over there? World War III started. Going back to oil prices. Again, they're attacking Iran again. If Iran gets involved militarily in this, forget about it. You're going to see, again, oil prices are going to spike, gold prices are going to spike, and nuclear war is going to spike. So don't forget to bend over and kiss your ass goodbye, because that's all you're going to be able to do if we don't have peace. No, it's just terrible. SWIFT is going to launch a central bank digital currency. Go back to your trends journals going back to 2017. We warned about this again over and over again, going from dirty cash to digital trash. Goes back to Bitcoin. Cryptocurrencies are going to, there he goes. That was back in, let's see, that was 4 years ago, that cover. Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies are going to go down when they ban them, when all the central banks go digital. It's as simple as that. But that's a long way away. And again, top trends for 2024, whole section in here, banks go bust. What's going on in the luxury market? The fish rots from the head down. Don't forget it. And you see what's going on there. Oh, and by the way, in China, talking about gold, they're buying it up like crazy. The middle class is going down. Gold sales are going way up. This year already in China, the plantation workers of Slavelandia over there have increased their gold purchases nearly 25% from last year. And China's central bank is the biggest buyer of gold, according to the World Gold Council. So again, and then a whole section on the Israeli war. Just breaks my heart to see what's happening. They're going to keep ramping up the Ukraine war. What happened over there with the blowing up of that concert hall is just the beginning. And all of what's going on. And the French general says that their army is ready for war. Top Polish warmonger says Western troops in Ukraine is, quote, an open secret. And that little guy over there in West Virginia, Mnuchin, keep ramping up the Ukraine war. God help us. They're selling this bullshit along with Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, that if we don't stop it over there, the United States is being threatened. It's been going on between fucking Ukraine and Russia for what, Catherine the Great? It's none of our business. And what else do we have here? Trends I views. Yep. Young Americans Seek into Sadness. Trends in High-Tech Science by Ben Davis. And a whole section on trends in AI. This is real. AI, we own you. That's the future. Tomorrow, tune in, 6 p.m. Eastern Time for Salenti and the Judge. And again, subscribe to the Trends Journal if you want to read history before it happens, because we've been ahead of the curve. They're not even close to what we're reporting. Matter of fact, now it's like big news that other people are coming out and warning about a banking crisis. Yeah, no shit. It's, again, and the big banks, they're saying they're going to be protected. No, they won't. This thing is going to be big. It's again, but don't worry. When all those fails, they take you to war, because World War III is going to heat up unless we have peace.
Let's start with the news today. The High Court in Great Britain rejected 6 appellate arguments made by Julian Assange, but did grant a few that would delay the extradition pending an assurance by the American government that A, he would not be exposed to the death penalty, B, he would be treated as American citizens are. He's obviously not being treated as British citizens are in this British hellhole where he's confined. And C, his First Amendment rights would be respected as if he were an American. I mean, are these judges naive? Who would believe any assurances from the United States government, much less one from the executive branch guaranteeing what the judicial branch is going to do?
Yeah. I don't think you can believe what the United States might promise, what the Department of Justice certainly might promise, because they have lost all credibility in the way they've behaved, not just with the Assange case, but in many different situations. They're a very politicized Department of Justice. You just can't trust them. So I can't imagine that our word, the American Department of Justice, or President Biden's word would be good. And they would, if they want to bring him here, they'll say anything. And once he's here, they'll do whatever they please.
But the Pentagon Papers case stands for the proposition that journalists can publish anything of material interest to the public, no matter what it is, no matter what it says, and no matter how they got it, without civil or criminal liability.
Yeah, that's called a free press. That's the foundation of Western civilization. Really, it's certainly something that we depend on here in this country. And of course, the government doesn't like it. And wasn't it one of the Supreme Court justices who said, "Oh, the First Amendment really strangles the government. It really is constraining on government." It's like, duh, lady, that's what it's for.
Correct. Correct. You know, the government always complains, oh, the Fourth Amendment's a pain in the neck. The First Amendment doesn't let us say whatever we want. Well, that's why we have a constitution, so that the government is an obstacle to your interference with our fundamental liberties. But it doesn't matter. We have the natural right to speak. We have the First Amendment protected right to speak. Yep. They'll still lock somebody up in a hellhole over the speech that he gave. They'll still spy on people. They have 5 years worth of his conversations from the basement of the Ecuadorian embassy, conversations with his wife and his lawyer.
Yeah. There's somebody, there's some at a lower level of the Department of Justice in that Eastern District Court of Virginia that prosecutes a lot of these types of cases. There's some people in there who are hung up about Assange. They feel personally betrayed or something, embarrassed to the max by what was released. The murder tape. I mean, the tapes that Manning was punished for revealing. That angered them so much they will not drop this bone. And so I don't know what's motivating it, but it is not United States government. It's not United States interest to keep pursuing him and to keep the indictment going. And it's not in really most of the government's interest to do it either. There are people in government, maybe deep state, justices or whatever, who, and even lower than that, like FBI agents who are determined that this guy's going to pay, kind of like the Pompeo attitude. There are people that share Pompeo's attitude that we should do something about this. This was really wrong that he embarrassed the United States government. And this cannot stand. And these people have this attitude, and it's actually very un-American. It's very totalitarian, really. And certainly it hates the Constitution. And these people, we employ them. We also, in addition to everything else that we do that's terrible in this world, that's paid for by American taxpayer dollars, prosecuting Assange and paying the salaries of the people that insist that this is something that must be done, that will really solve a problem. We're paying for all of that. Just to remind everybody, you're paying for it.
Do you think there's any credibility in the intelligence community, either domestic or foreign, to the statements by the United States government within 55 minutes of the conclusion of the horrible attack on the Russian theater that, it wasn't Ukraine and it was ISIS-K? Well, who the heck would believe that? They hadn't even caught these guys yet.
No, I think that's an example of the kind of people that are running our government. They don't even know how to proceed with a good lie. They jumped the gun, which of course revealed everything. Either if in 55 minutes of a very confusing event and deadly and foggy event that happened halfway around the world, if in 55 minutes you know who did it, who didn't do it, you've got all that cleared up, that reveals insight, that reveals foreknowledge. So why would you not wait another 6 hours? But they couldn't wait. They couldn't wait because they don't know what they're doing. But yeah, no, there's zero credibility with that. I mean, absolutely zero. The warning that they put out to our diplomatic posts in Russia that all of the Americans should stay away from concert halls, but they don't bother to reveal their sources or any information to the targets of this, which of course we saw what happened. So they have zero credibility. You can't believe anything they say, and actually the style is offensive. I mean, if you're going to be a good liar, come on, that's all they do is lie. We ought to be better at it than what they are.
Here it is. We have an Australian citizen who was arrested because they said that he was not a good journalist. He was reporting from, what's the magazine? The
WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks. And, so they've been fighting that. He's been in prison and he's been locked up in an embassy for all these years.
Yeah.
And now it's a legal thing back and forth. But the thing of it is, they're not dealing with where they arrested him. They're not going to punish him here, even though they have. And they're not going to send him back to Australia, even though Australia is opening their minds to something like that. Yeah. But no, it has to come to America. And I guess in looking at this case, Daniel, the one thing that has astounded me, because I don't remember this happening, but obviously it did, that Trump was, they tried to release Trump. The American CIA wanted to do it, and that of course failure. But the evidence is they talk about they were going to assassinate him.
Yeah.
I mean, what in the world is going on here? And I've had somebody a long time ago. He was from the old right, and he worked in the CIA and was involved in when they were, he worked in the CIA and helped establish that. But he came to the conclusion that any country that accepts a program like the CIA, it can no longer remain a republic. And I would say that it's coming pretty close to having happened in our country.
What happened earlier today, and Joe Loria writes, the High Court in London on Tuesday gave the United States an opportunity to rebuff Julian Assange's plea that he be allowed to appeal the Home Office's order to extradite him to the U.S. to face espionage charges. And Joe rightly points out, in a complex ruling at the Royal Courts of Justice, the court agreed with Assange that he had the grounds to ask for an appeal, but he invited the court ruled that the United States is invited to give the court assurances by April 16th that could negate Assange's arguments. So it's really a curlicue. He has the right to appeal the offer, if you can actually put it back up, appeal the order to extradite him, but the U.S. can preempt that with its own assurances.
Yes, and I keep thinking, assurances, how much are they worth?
From the Epoch Times, FDA settles ivermectin case, agrees to remove controversial stop-it posts.
Dealing with an illegal institution that regulates medicine, and in a free society it wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have an FDA.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have an FDA principle that would be a voluntary thing that could be worked out. But no, you don't have an FDA that's owned by the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, no kidding.
And that's part of the the combination of big business and big government. And there is a medical industrial complex. FDA, and you hear so many stories of people being in the FDA and then they're into research, and they get out of the FDA and they have a good living afterwards.
Oh yeah,
because it makes a big deal. But we talk about the FDA right now for the prohibition of use of drugs, and that happens routinely over the years. And sometimes they might fall accidentally on doing the right thing. There are some bad things out there that they'll come across and they don't approve it. But that's not the way it's supposed to be done. There are other ways, because the one thing that they had to exclude when COVID hit was to exclude any discussion of it or anything that was known for 30 years in medicine. And people would appreciate the medication. They say, you can't use it and you'll be in trouble, you will be canceled. And it was a disaster. And I would say it'd be safe to say that a lot of people died because of their regulations.
Yeah, and it was worse than being canceled because doctors were losing their licenses, being forbidden from practicing medicine because they said, why don't you give this a try? I mean, what the FDA, as you say, in bed with the pharmaceutical companies, what they demanded is that there can be no treatments from the time you contact this supposed virus to the time you're in the hospital. You can't do anything but lie there and wait for it to happen. A tweet about it, Jeff Carlson tweets, the FDA has reportedly changed their position on ivermectin and agreed to remove all negative posts, if we can put that next one up. And he makes a point, I think you made it, and it's correct. They should, at a minimum, if we can there we go, they should at a minimum issue a formal announcement and apology. How many people might have been saved if the FDA had acted honestly? That's a good question.
Yeah.
And here's one of the ads they're going to take down. We talked about this on the show, how absurd and ridiculous this is. Put the next one on. This is one of the ads they're taking down. It's a picture for those of us just listening. It's that famous ad where a woman is holding a horse and a doctor is holding a man. It says, "You're not a horse, you're not a cow. Seriously, y'all, stop it. Why you should not use ivermectin." They had to take that down. It was such a disingenuous recommendation saying that this is only for horses and cows when it had been used, as you say, for humans for 50 years.
They have to know they're defying common sense and what has been the practice of medicine for years. But why they do it, you say, well, what is their motivation? Did all of a sudden they forgot all the things that they should have known? Or could there have been a monetary benefit from doing this?
Well,
Stay along.
Yeah. You remember what it was like when we were doing the show during COVID? We were afraid to use that word during the show because even using it, YouTube would take down your show and give you a strike, and you could lose your entire show. Now, YouTube should give apologies for all the people they took down for saying this. And look what they did to Rogan. Remember when Rogan got COVID and he said, "Look, I'm taking some ivermectin." They treated him like anathema. They treated him like the worst, disgusting person on earth. CNN famously ran a clip of him. They put a filter over his face to make him look gray and sick, because they wanted people to think that he was taking horse paste, taking horse medicine. Turns out he was right.
The principle of malpractice should exist and does exist, but there's a lot of malpractice suits. It gets really cluttered up for various reasons. But you're not allowed to sue the people who did this. Put these ads up. No, you can't sue like that horrible ad you put up there. It's a blatant lie, and somebody died because of it. But no, that's not permitted.
Yeah. The only thing we can hope, and I don't know, maybe it'll happen that people will be more skeptical and they'll get angry a lot quicker. Because as you always say, they did start waking up, but it was very, very late in the game. So
existence exists, and the act of grasping that statement implies two corollary axioms: that something exists which one perceives, and that one exists possessing consciousness. Whatever the degree of your knowledge, these two, existence and consciousness, are axioms you cannot escape. These two are the irreducible primaries implied in any action you undertake in any part of your knowledge, and in its sum, from the first ray of light you perceive at the start of your life, to the widest erudition you might acquire at its end. Whether you know the shape of a pebble or the structure of a solar system, the axioms remain the same, that it exists and that you know it. To exist is to be something, as distinguished from the nothing of non-existence. It is to be an entity of a specific nature made of specific attributes. Centuries ago, the man who was, no matter what his errors, the greatest of your philosophers, has stated the formula defining the concept of existence and the rule of all knowledge. A is A. A thing is itself. You have never grasped the meaning of his statement. I am here to complete it. Existence is identity. Consciousness is identification. Whatever you choose to consider, be it an object, an attribute, or an action, the law of identity remains the same. A leaf cannot be a stone at the same time. It cannot be all red and all green at the same time. It cannot freeze and burn at the same time. A is A. Or if you wish it stated in simpler language, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. Are you seeking to know what is wrong with the world? All the disasters that have wrecked your world came from your leader's attempt to evade the fact that A is A. That man is man.
Israel is withdrawing its negotiators from Qatar and is blaming the lack of a hostage deal with Hamas on a UN Security Council resolution that called for a Ramadan ceasefire in Gaza. So Hamas officials said on Monday that the Palestinian group was still seeking a hostage deal that included a permanent ceasefire and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and this is a position that Israel has repeatedly rejected. So Netanyahu's office said in a statement, quote, Hamas's stance clearly demonstrates its utter disinterest in a negotiated deal and attests to the damage done by the UN Security Council's resolution, end quote. The statement continued, quote, Hamas has once again rejected an American compromise proposal and has repeated its extreme demands, an immediate halt to the war, the complete withdrawal of the IDF from the Gaza Strip, and leaving in place its administration so that it can repeat time and again the massacre of October 7th as it has promised to do, end quote. So what's interesting is that the U.S. actually rejected Netanyahu's claim that the Security Council resolution was to blame. State Department spokesman Matt Miller said that Netanyahu's position was, quote, inaccurate in almost every respect, and it's unfair to the hostages and their families, end quote. He also said that Hamas prepared this statement before the resolution was passed. And then I just get into a little more of this Netanyahu being angry at the U.S. The U.S. has been downplaying the resolution, saying that it's non-binding and won't impact Israeli military operations. But the UN and other member states, including I saw the UK, was saying it should be implemented. They're disputing this claim from the U.S., saying that the resolution is binding and must be followed. Realistically, there's no way to enforce this. It's, these UN Security Council resolutions. But the fact that the U.S. is saying that, because again, it just goes to show the way that they pick and choose to use international law, use the UN when it suits their interests. So this is Alexander Bortnikov. He is the head of Russia's Federal Security Service. He said on Tuesday that the US, the UK, and Ukraine could have been involved in this terrorist attack on a concert hall outside of Moscow that killed 139 people. He was asked he was talking to reporters and said that Russia was trying to identify everyone who was involved in the massacre, from the shooters to people who might have orchestrated it. And he was asked, do you think these countries might be involved? And he said, quote, we think that is so. In any case, we are now talking about the information that we have. This is general information, but the investigators also have concrete results, end quote. So this is, of course, concerning, because how might Russia escalate if they believe Ukraine was involved in this attack, if they believe the U.S. and British intelligence was involved in this attack? The ISIS affiliate base in Afghanistan, known as the Islamic State Khorasan province, or ISIS-K, has taken credit for the attack, and this claim has been backed by the U.S. The U.S. came out and said it was ISIS. It definitely wasn't Ukraine, while Russia's still investigating it, so that's a little suspicious. And I think, judging by ISIS-K's recent pattern of attacks and behavior, I think it's certainly possible that it was them. But there's also all sorts of questions about who might have helped them, facilitated the attack. And Putin said on Monday that radical Islamists carried out the attack, but he suggested Ukraine could have been involved. He was saying, we got to find out who ordered it. And he said it was suspicious that the U.S. is trying to convince everybody that Ukraine had nothing to do with this. It's not out of the realm of possibilities, I don't think, for Ukraine to have done some sort of cooperation with ISIS, but it's total speculation. I have no idea. It's just I'm saying basically it's not out of the realm of possibilities is all I'm saying here. And of course, the big concern is that if Russia determines that or believes that, what is the implication there? What's the response going to be? Who knows what that could lead to. So according to Financial Times, the U.S. and Japan will unveil a plan to restructure the U.S. military command in Japan to strengthen operational planning and exercises between the two nations when Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visits the White House on April 10th. So that's just a couple weeks away. He's going to be in D.C. And there's not too much detail about what this will mean. The only thing the report really says is that it will give the head of U.S. Forces Japan more authority to coordinate with Japan's military rather than having to go through U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, which is based in Hawaii. So other details of the plan are unclear, but it could be related to Japan increasing its military capabilities, as the U.S. has been encouraging Tokyo to move away from its post-World War II constitution, which renounces war and says that armed forces with war potential should never be maintained. So some people call it a pacifist constitution, but they've kind of been moving away from this for a long time. And it was Shinzo Abe that really got the ball rolling, I think, in 2015. He was the Japanese prime minister who was actually assassinated and killed. It was after he was in office, but I forget. That was just was that a few years ago now when he was killed? But anyway, the current government, they've really ramped this up. And at the end of 2022, Japan announced it was increasing its military budget by 56% and that they're going to acquire Tomahawk missiles, which will be the longest range missiles that they have. They have a range of over 1,000 miles. And this, again, goes against this pacifist constitution that was imposed on Japan by U.S. occupation forces, but now the U.S. is encouraging Japan to build up its military. And it's all about China. Japan has said so explicitly, just like the U.S., that this is about China.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
We're moving up toward Easter time. This was one of the covers of our Trends Journal back in 2000.
Is that George W. Bush that he's chasing?
No, that's one of the Goldman Sachs gang, I think.
Okay.
Just a different bunch of money changers. What's we have? J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs. I think it's a Goldman Sachs gang. But here it is, Easter time. What happened? I mean, was it 3 days after Christ drove the money changers out of the temple? He's on the cross.
Yeah.
And the money changers are in charge of the world again today.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. The generation behind us, I don't want to get too deep into this, will probably see digital currency exclusively, and the government will be able to close your bank account if you don't take the vaccine that they want or say what they want you to say. It's terrible, 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 terrible for human freedom where we're going.
Yeah, and that's your article that's coming out tomorrow. It's about freedom and liberty and how we lost it. You said when American colonists were oppressed by British governance, the word most frequently uttered in pamphlets, editorials, and sermons was not safety or taxes. It was freedom. Freedom. It's gone. You're not allowed to think for yourself anymore. I'll be the president, and I'm going to put together a misinformation cabinet so that you'll only believe the crap spewing out of my mouth. And the clowns that I hire, the bureaucrats.
As absurd as that sounds, and I realize you say it with some sarcasm, it's meaningful because that's essentially what the Department of Justice told the Biden administration last week before the Supreme Court in a case involving whether or not the Department of Homeland Security could coerce big tech into manipulating their algorithms so as to advance stories the government wanted and suppress stories the government didn't want. The DOJ actually told the court the government needs to correct misinformation in the marketplace. Stated differently, the government wants to regulate or control or influence the marketplace of ideas. The whole purpose of the First Amendment is to prevent the government from doing it, to keep it entirely and completely and unequivocally and unconditionally out of the business of speech.
And now, as we had warned a long time ago, World War III has begun, and it's just going to keep escalating. And we just saw what happened in Moscow with the slaughter of, now it's up to 140 people are dead.
It's hard
to get on ISIS's.
So here, this is very interesting. How could anyone accept seriously the statements of the United States State Department, Gerald, within 55 minutes of the attack. The attack took about half an hour, but within 55 minutes of it, the State Department says two things. It wasn't Ukraine, and it was ISIS-K. How could they possibly have known that in that time period? It is now known that there were substantial connections to Ukraine, and it is now generally believed that MI6, the British intelligence, and CIA knew about this and helped not plan and plot it, but trained the people that planned and plotted it, and then they looked the other way. So this is an act of war by the West on Moscow, just like this crazy President Macron now threatening to send 20,000 French troops to Ukraine. That's an act of war. How long does he think those 20,000 troops will survive? Does he think that Russia's just going to let them sit there, armed to the teeth and ready to attack Russia? Of course not.
This is from this week's Trends Journal. Here's one of the articles. French general says his army is ready for war. You ready what he says here? If you want peace, prepare for war. Well, can you imagine the stupidity of this? If you want peace, prepare for war.
If you want peace, prepare to defend yourself. But nobody's attacking France. The West has this myth, is perpetrating this myth that Putin wants to invade Europe. It's absurd. Putin just wants NATO out of Ukraine. That could be done in half an hour if saner heads prevailed. But Joe Biden wants to run for re-election as a wartime president. I don't know what he's going to do because Ukraine is on its last leg. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is in favor of the $61 billion in aid, but even if it comes, it's too little too late. Most of it stays here in the U.S. to build more equipment by the military-industrial complex to replace that which has been sent over there. So it's not like we're sending more ammunition. We're building more ammunition here to replace what we've already sent. I don't even know if the members of Congress understand that.
Lloyd Austin tells Galt, that's the guy heading
that's the Israeli defense minister.
Yeah. He said, Israel's security bond is unshakable. Isn't that nice? So Austin said, your security bond is our security bond, and it's unshakable. You ready? The United States is Israel's closest friend, and that won't change. Who the hell is this slob to say this crap? Who are they to say what we, the people of the United States, should support?
So, and I don't know if you heard this, Scott, but I think just today, Jake Sullivan is in Kiev again, and he had this amazing statement. He said, the United States will consider Ukraine a victory if it emerges from the war as a sovereign, democratic, and free country. So no more talk about getting your territories back or getting Crimea back or anything. It'll be we talk about moving the goalposts. It'll be a great victory if they actually survive as a country.
Well, yeah, and no more talk about the great strategic victory and the strategic defeat they're gonna inflict on the Russians for daring to try it either.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just gone. So I think that kind of shift in realizing this is an election year, we're getting heavily into the election season. We pretty much know who the two front runners are going to be. Therefore, we need to shift gears out of this losing prospect. So I think that's one of the reasons why Victoria Nuland was out. And remember, she was up for the number 2 post at state, and she could never get confirmed. So that was another big deal. In fact, someone was promoted over her, who's known, I forget the person's name, who is known as a China hawk. So she's a Russia hawk. So she's passed by for a China hawk. So that's bipartisanship. That's the Washington war machine.
Yeah. Well, just to go back one step, that really is the greatest news I've heard all year about Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, climbing way, way down on the Ukraine goals ladder there. Dan, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. If you just survive as a country, we're going to call it a victory. It's incredible. I mean, at this point, I've thought about this a lot, the $61 billion. Everyone that I listen to and talk to, and we talk to a lot of the same people, Scott, and has said that this $61 billion is not going to change the outcome of the war for a lot of reasons. Number one being that we just don't have the weapons. You can't buy, no matter how much money you have, if there are no weapons to buy, you can't buy them. And we're not manufacturing them. So there's no way it can make a difference in that respect. These are the people that Trump is talking most about, or people around Trump are talking most about as his potential national security team. and they're like Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton, and get this,
God.
Mike Pompeo.
Yeah.
I mean, so if this is anything more, I mean, this might be just neocons neoconning, you know, where they'll throw something out there because they wish that was happening.
Yeah.
But if it is indeed happening, it's extremely concerning.
No, it's certainly not surprising.
Not surprising. Yeah. He never gets it. Yeah, they say that Rubio, who serves as vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, could be a fit to head the CIA. Little Marco heading the CIA.
Oh my God. And then, you know, in the middle of the Gaza war, and in a way, it's the best thing about him is that everything he says on whatever issue is always just so over the top.
Yeah.
That it just goes to show how absolutely horrible his thinking is, where he's equating Biden's absolute, unequivocal, full-fledged support for the slaughter in Gaza. And he says, that's selling the Israelis out. That's nothing compared to the violence I'll inflict on those people if I'm given half a chance again.
Yeah.
You know, like he's just mad that he's not president right now so he can be the one helping Netanyahu complete this genocide.
And I mean, and he's not reading the room because, I mean, if you look at the polls, even among the Republican Party voters, people are walking away from Israel as fast as they can. I mean, this whole thing has shifted American opinion. I think we talked about a poll on our show where it was something like 52% of Republicans opposed more U.S. military aid to Israel. I mean, that's a massive swing. So
wow, yeah, that really is. I hadn't seen that. That's great.
I'll dig it up and send it over to you. But I mean, that's Trump not reading the room, and maybe he just doesn't care. I mean, you never get punished for being considered too pro-Israel, or you hadn't in the past, you know. But things are changing.
Yeah, well, and it really is. I mean, and look, I know you poor guy. I don't know how you did it living in Washington D.C. all those years around all those crazy people, but to me, it is fascinating a little bit, the electoral politics angle. It's not usually my focus, but the politics of politics up there, you know, and how these people have to play this when they're all Israel first. And you just can't be America first when you're Israel first. And you can't even be Biden first if you're Israel first. And that both parties right now are compromising themselves so bad on this issue where the party leadership is locked up is just about as horrible as could be, aside from a little bit of posturing by Chuck Schumer. But otherwise, you know, it's like it's the people versus the leadership of the parties in both parties and more and more all the time.
Yeah, but the Schumer thing is a scam. You know, that's a desperate attempt to pull Biden's chestnuts out of the fire, because that whole little routine was basically Schumer saying this is all the fault of the right-wing Netanyahu. You know, we of course are distancing ourselves from the right-wing Netanyahu, trying to erase some of the damage that Biden has done to his own voter base by his absolute blind adherence to whatever Israel is doing in Gaza. So that whole thing was a completely transparent attempt by Schumer to blame everything on the right wing, allied with Trump, sort of thing. You know,
Although. Yeah, I can see that working on American Democrats, but what about the rest of the world? Because what he said in the speech about how's Israel going to survive if it's an absolute pariah state on the planet, that still stands. Because even if it's Benny Gantz or whoever's next, you're either going to give these people citizenship or independence or the status quo. And if it's the status quo, I don't see the rest of the planet being so appeased by a speech in the Senate, you know?
Live from Run Your Mouth World Headquarters, it's today's Run Your Mouth.
So here you go. Did you guys watch this? You get this ship. It's like someone was like, all right, I think I lined it up. Turn off the lights. Pretend like the powers went out. Now, listen, I have no idea. I don't ride boats. I don't know the engineering on bridges. But, I mean, talk about a wild accident. If you wanted to sit down and be like, what could be a really expensive accident? They ain't got no fail-safes on boats to just shut the thing down. You can't start throwing anchors off of it. I mean, listen, I know nothing about boats. I don't know that if it starts being hacked, well, you can't say that. No one knows that the thing was actually hacked. You guys think, well, what's fun about this? We'll come back to this myocarditis article in a minute, is now we're going to see endless diagrams on Twitter from everyone's grandpa who pretends that they know how boats work. You're going to see every wild explanation in the world of, well, because of the currents, this was a natural occurrence for a boat to steer in that way. Oh, no, I know the exact logistics and the math. And you're going to see people doing the geometry of how quickly you could steer a boat. And all of a sudden it's going to be somebody installed a commercial engine onto this thing because normally boats can't even turn that fast. And it was only because this thing was installed on that specific boat that it was even able to turn at that radius. And then you're going to hear other people saying, no, boats turn at that radius all the time. Point that I'm trying to say is We're never going to know, but we will get to hear every single wild person's explanation where you sit there with your jaw down, just nodding like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, waves at a certain angle can absolutely prevent a boat like that from steering. Oh, I heard that boat is usually packed with more things on it, so it couldn't have possibly moved at that. I'm just saying we're going to be in for a long and wild ride of bullshit, which is kind of my specialty. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this thing develops. But is there like a book out there on Amazon of how to destroy critical infrastructure in America? Does everything in our country have like, just like, is everything like a house of cards that if you just know, it's almost like the Death Star, that if you just hit that one point on the Death Star, the whole thing will crumble? Is all of our infrastructure have like little tiny levers all in them that if you just touch that one thing, the whole thing's going to fall apart? Every building's got one little column in the basement that the whole thing just relies on that one column. It just seems a little odd that these bridges are built. You just have to hit one of the things, the whole thing's going to collapse. And anyway, so back to myocarditis, because we know how reliable he's been in regards to people pouring over our border. Not an emergency. Whole situation's under control. It's been under control the whole time. We would have it under even more control if the Republicans would just pass our legislation to legalize everyone that's coming over. So let's see what myocarditis had to say in regards to whether or not this was terrorism, which here's what he said. Mayorkas said cargo ship collision was not intentional act. Homeland Security DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said there are no indications the collision of the cargo ship which caused the collapse of the bridge in Baltimore was an intentional act. He added that the U.S. Coast Guard, overseas by DHS, was on the scene along with our state and local partners and is actively involved in search and rescue operations this morning. What do you guys think? Let's go to the chat for a second. You guys think that this was people hacked into the boat, starting to go for our critical infrastructure? The Russians or someone else are starting to get their revenge on us? The Israelis are warning us that we better support what's going on. Who do you think might have been responsible for this? You think someone stuck over the border, captured this boat, they don't want to tell us the story? Or you think that this was just a freak accident, power outage, thing steered right into a column? Let's take a look at the comments, see what people have to say. The bridge had it coming. That's from Edward Snowman. Yeah, I actually saw that bridge move and walk right into the boat. That's what I saw. At Runaway Slob, at Robbie the Fire, they want to rename the bridge and make it a giant rainbow. There we go. And let's take one more comment. We fail at everything, but it's Republicans at fault. All right, moving forward. What do we got next, Mr. Producer Man? In terms of having to deal with this kind of topics inserted into every single walk of life, this was reported in Zero Hedge. Museum claims dinosaurs have LGBTQ history and brides are queer. A museum in Britain has claimed that some birds are queer and that the history of animal queerness has been hidden from the public. Animals have been queer the whole time. It's not that like even, I guess it's like you're not even born gay. It's that we've suppressed gayness by trying to pretend like it's not overwhelming in nature. And if people understood how robust gayness has been going all the way back to the dinosaurs, everyone would feel more comfortable with this. And then you're like just trying to be in a museum with your kid. And you're like, why is this T-Rex banging another T-Rex in front of me? Why do I have to look at this picture? And why do they put giant wieners on the T-Rexes to let me know that they were both men? But no, everything's got to be inserted everywhere all the time so that we're always aware. Point over. All right, couple quick topics, and then that's our episode. ISIS attack in Russia. We talked about that on on a recent part of the problem. It does seem it's another just crazy story. Isn't it amazing how many just crazy stories we've had recently where the official narrative isn't even much of a story other than we don't know or there's no information at this time? It does seem like this is why we shouldn't be having casual wars with people, because casual wars do seem to escalate. And so, and if there was any tie-ins with our intelligence communities or otherwise, trying to strike out at Russia. And then it's interesting that 2 days later, we got a boat that goes directly into a bridge. And then we go, oh, that had nothing to do with hacking or terrorism.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
It's not that things can't get better. It's that things can't go back. They can't go back to the way they were. You can't reverse entropy.
No, can I just get clarification on that? When you say things can't go back, you hear the left saying a lot of times, you can't turn back the clock. Mm-hmm. And what they mean by that is that once a left-wing innovation has taken root, it's there forever. And so if you want to reverse it, forget about it, because the clock moves in one direction. And and the Whig theory of history says that we just progress onward and upward toward the left-wing utopia. Now, the Whig theory of history didn't necessarily mean that, but it did mean that history is not really zigzag. It really is kind of a line like this. And so I know you're saying you can't just say, well, we'll just recreate the conditions of the 1950s just like that in 2024.
And even if you could, in 10 years, you'd have the 1960s because precisely replicated the same conditions that produced
Yes,
the
exactly. That's right. Yeah, I've said this for the longest time. There must have been something wrong with the 50s if they led to the 60s, right?
Exactly.
So there must have been something wrong. But you're certainly not saying that no left-wing gain can ever be overturned. I think you're kind of saying you can't just transplant with a time machine a whole society from X number of years ago and just start it all over again. But surely we can overturn some of the craziness.
Well, you
I don't know
can.
how, but we can.
Well, I don't know how either, but you can't. You can't. How do I put it? The original system of the 1950s was outcompeted and overcome by what came after. And so to say that you're going to just sort of revert to an earlier save of the society, it's like, well, it's just going to get beaten again in the exact same way. And plus, you're in this situation where you're not only existing or trying to instantiate this outdated system, and by outdated I don't mean morally inferior or whatever, like the way the left means. I mean outcompeted. It was defeated, and defeated for like very clear, understandable reasons. If you try to instantiate that, not only are you trying to create an outmoded, a defeated system, but you're also like trying to create it as a zoo, as like a nature preserve for your little past ideology, which takes tons of energy and resources.
Before we go into other approaches to this problem that we face, I want to know if in your opinion, you could. I mean, I feel like if you ever do achieve the kind of society you want, even then you can't like rest on your laurels, because there's always these things are obviously unstable, and you have to preserve what you've built. But I guess my question is, how can somebody like you or somebody like me, how can we ever win, for any length of time, when it seems as if it's inevitable that any society we build will be put upon by the same kind of people who have wrecked every society? That is to say, we being like conservative minded are not really thinking about bringing the blessings of natural rights all around the world. Okay, now some people thought that's what conservatives favor, but that's because they're dumb. We care about what's closest to us. We understand that our sentiments and our sympathies extend in a series of concentric circles. They don't start in Ukraine. They start here with your home. And if your home's a mess, but all your attention is on how bad Putin is, there's something wrong with you. Like mentally, something wrong with you. So we have finite goals, because also we have a view of human beings, that they're not perfectible, they're not infinitely malleable. We're not going to engage in vast social experiments on them. We're happy if we can have a decent, livable society where we are. But we're always going to be up against the builders, the revolutionaries, the builders of revolutionary societies, the destroyers generally, and people who frankly don't care about these matters of hearth and home and the kinds of sentiments that you and I might have. And they're the kind of people who, when they see something like this, their every instinct says destroy, 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 undermine, and destroy. How can we ever win? Because we're not that way. We're busy working and raising families. We don't think that way. So are we always going to be defeated by people whose job it is to upend traditional societies?
Well, there's a cycle to it, right? Because that impulse to destroy, obviously by definition can't hold itself together. And so it's a question of how bad does the pain have to get for the people who are temperamentally opposed to conflict, opposed to upheaval, it's just the Declaration of Independence when a long train of abuses, that's where the line is. And part of what I talk about in the episode is that the people controlling the present system are vulnerable to entropy, in some ways more vulnerable to entropy than we are. In the exact same way, the world's changing on them too. And their philosophy and their ideology is purpose built for our existing like managerial economic system, whereas what we have are some timeless principles, hopefully.
Well, first, I want to kick this off with a few choice quotes from the founding generation to give us an idea of how things are supposed to be. Here from John Jay, who ended up being the first Chief Justice of the United States. And he said, "With respect to the protection of national industry, I take it for granted that it will always flourish where it is lucrative and not discouraged. which was the case in North America when I left. Every man then being at liberty by the law to cultivate the earth as he pleased, to raise what he pleased, to manufacture as he pleased, and to sell the produce of his labor to whom he pleased, and for the best prices, without any duties or impositions whatsoever. So that's how this first Chief Justice looked at, well, the best for industry in the United States. Basically, to manufacture as you choose how to do it. And then if you aren't controlled by government and no one is forced to buy or sell anything, then it's up to people if they choose they want to purchase. This is a very free market mentality. So was Pelatiah Webster in his essay on free trade and finance, someone I don't quote very often, but a good one. I propose to take off every restraint and limitation from our commerce. Let trade be as free as air. Or how about Thomas Jefferson? Now, these types of views were very, very common, even though they weren't universal. But Thomas Jefferson's view here in his first inaugural address, he's basically establishing the policies of the federal government in March of 1801. So you can see, you'll be able to see how different things are today from Jefferson's policy. He said, a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. Don't tax the people. Don't tax them. This is the sum of good government. That's how Jefferson defines good government. And we, as Elizabeth Nolan Brown over at Reason puts it, the absurd Apple antitrust lawsuit. She writes that the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ, and 16 states are suing Apple over its alleged monopoly of the smartphone market. I can tell you, I have two smartphones. I have one that's an Apple product for personal use and one for the 10th Amendment Center of business use, which is an Android product. If it was a monopoly, I mean, they of course define monopoly in a very weird way, but a monopoly means a monopoly. I couldn't own those two phones, first of all. I should just point out that absurd point of it. Anyways, that's not how government views these things. She says it's an absolutely bonkers lawsuit based on weird ideas about business and even weirder ideas about government. And unfortunately, weird in this this kind of context does not mean unusual or strange. Unfortunately, it's very common. She said the Apple lawsuit shows just how eager the Biden administration is to bring business decisions under federal control. And I wouldn't blame just the current administration. I think it's just building upon where things were left to it. And of course, the current one's always going to be worse than the previous one overall. If you zoom out and you get a big picture of it. More from the complaint here. They say Apple's smartwatch, Apple Watch, is only compatible with the iPhone. So if Apple can steer a user towards buying an Apple Watch, it becomes more costly for that person to switch because they have to get an iPhone. And I was thinking about getting one of these smartwatches for my mom as she's aging to kind of have some of the health monitoring and things like that. And I was thinking, maybe an Apple smartwatch. But it doesn't really work with her Android phone. So it doesn't do all the things that I want it to do. So I'm going to have to look at other options. But again, is it that I want the government to force Apple to make it work with these other platforms? I think that's absurd. That's bad. That's really dangerous because the power that you give government to do something, to force first of all, if you're okay with using force, because ultimately what this gets down to is they have to use the threat of violence to make this happen. There is no freedom in this. Like, yeah, maybe I would like Apple to be able to make their product more compatible, or I would like Google to make their product more compatible with certain things. But as soon as you get down to saying, well, if you don't do it, I want dudes with guns to be able to show up your door and to shut you down or to fine you and control you, then I am a terrible human being. I mean, that's ultimately what it gets down to. I want to vote with my dollars and purchase the products that I'm going to purchase that are best for me and then not purchase the ones that are not best for me. That's really ultimately what it gets down to. Now, most people, as I was mentioning, when they're discussing this, they're really debating whether the DOJ's claims are correct or not. And I kind of fell into that a little bit as well when I was talking about iMessage, talking about the values of it and the benefits, like, this is a good thing, and here's the reason why they did this. And I don't think that even really needs to be said because that can be covered all over the place. And whether Apple is right or wrong in their business decisions is ultimately going to fall on them. And I think most people are ignoring what I think you're probably understanding that I'm getting to here, which is the underlying fundamental issue here. But ultimately, the people who run their business, as John Jay was saying at the beginning, as Thomas Jefferson, they have to have the freedom to manufacture things as they please, because ultimately, that's how you learn what works and what doesn't work. And then the market responds in certain ways. Let's say you love the idea of government going after Apple. Let's say you hate Apple for whatever reason. That's cool. Let's say you think these are good end results. Whatever your goal is, you have to think if government is going to use a power for something you like, eventually the worst person on earth, your ultimate enemy, is going to have that same power, and they probably will not use it in ways that you want them to use it. In fact, it'll probably be opposite. And that's how John Jay described things in 1788. He said, remember that a power to do good always involves a power to do harm. He was the first Chief Justice. Here's the third Chief Justice, Oliver Ellsworth, back in 1787. He wasn't the Chief Justice at that point, but this was in the ratification debates. He said, a power of doing good always implies a power to do evil if the person or party be disposed.
First clip. Now, this is from a Gallup poll that just was released today, I believe, just before we started the show, which is majority of Americans now oppose Israeli action in Gaza, as you mentioned, Dr. Paul. Gallup poll. Let's look at a couple of the numbers from Axios. They do a good job at summarizing it. Driving the news. 55% of Americans disapprove of Israel's military response in Gaza. Now, this is incredible. A 10 percentage point increase since November. 10% increase in the amount of people who disapprove. About 1 in 3 of Americans, that's 36%, approve of Israel's military actions in Gaza, according to a new poll. 36%, only a little over 1 in 3 Americans approve. That's down from the aftermath of the Hamas October 7th attack, when a November poll found that half of Americans approve. So that's a big shift downward. They go on to say among Republicans, the percentage who approve of Israel's actions has dropped from 71% in November to 64% in March. So even among Republicans, who generally are the most pro-Israel group, that is a significant drop. But the dip is even sharper, writes Axios, among Democrats. Fewer than 1 in 5, that is 18%, say they approve of Israel's actions. That's down from 36% in November. So the approval among Democrats has dropped in half. And among people who identify as independents, the approval rating has dropped from 47 to 29 in that span. So dramatic numbers, Dr. Paul, out of America on this, what's happening in Gaza right now. And they are going, I would say, not necessarily against Israel, more probably importantly, and I'll have some info later, against Joe Biden.
You know, during an election year, there are a lot of polls going on, and a lot of them are very biased, and you have to pick and choose because some will be put out by campaign. But I think Gallup still has maintained some integrity because we put more weight on it. Yeah. And if they come up short, it could be a mistake or something, but it's still something that they rely on. It's not like, this poll was ordered by the president, so it must be a great poll. So no, I think this is great news that the shifting has occurred. Hopefully this will make a difference in bringing peace in not only in the Middle East and Israel, but also in Ukraine and these other places, because there's some statistics now about what's happening in Ukraine and how foolish it is. And the more foolish it gets, the more they have to, to say, we're going to win. We can't win, but we're going to keep fighting until we win. That kind of stuff.
Good comment. Well, we'll close out the show with our third story. And this is, I think, I would put this in the category of the Western world, if you want to call it that, has just been living in the land of delusion. Now, we discussed how in the newest British destroyer ships, I think, they had to put gymnasiums in where the missiles were because they couldn't afford missiles, right? So they're ready to go toe-to-toe with Russia. They're ready to go to war with Russia, but they're going to be riding on their stationary bikes instead of firing missiles over there. That probably will scare them. But anyway, so this came out this morning. There was a hearing in the British Parliament. UK general admits the military couldn't fight Russia for more than a couple of months. And here we're like over 2 years into this war in Ukraine. Go to the next one. So here's what happened. UK General Rob McGowan admitted in a committee meeting on March 26 that the UK's military couldn't fight Russia for more than a couple of months because we don't have the ammunition and reserves of equipment to do it. The striking admission was the latest warning from UK defense and military officials, cautioning that the country is unprepared for armed conflict. Officials from other NATO countries have repeated similar concerns.
But you know why that statement is out right now? This is the way they make their requests.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this bad, and we're going to scare the people, but they're having more trouble scaring the people, and they're changing the American people's mind. We're sick and tired of it. We're sick and tired of it. We better start taking care of our problems rather than Cowtown.
See, that's exactly what I thought. We're on the same wavelength. I thought, okay, on one hand, this is a real hardcore admission that we can't fight. But the other one is like, remember when the neocons in Congress, we have a hollowed out military. We spend $1 trillion a year. It's hollowed out. We need to spend more. So you're absolutely right, I think, on that.
And they say we're down to nothing. And what was it? The otother day, yesterday I mentioned where they finally got some money and it was paying, we can go out and buy more bullets. They say, well, we've already used those bullets.
We already paid for
them. But they protect themselves. You're not allowed to audit. You're not allowed to have somebody supervising and looking where all this stuff goes.
Yes. We'll go to the next clip. This is a little bit more about the story. It's worth looking at. So this is the same hearing in the UK Parliament. McGowan's acknowledgement on March 26 went even further as he responded to a direct question from lawmaker Mark Francois about the ability of the UK to fight Russia. Quote, this is the lawmaker, the member of parliament, we're not ready for an enduring war. Do you accept that? Francois asked, to which McGowan responded, yes, absolutely. Quote from Francois, we could not fight an enduring war against Russia. Drop all these euphemisms about peer adversaries. Francois continued. So he's basically saying, cut the BS. You can't fight. Military's not ready to fight. Stop rattling sabers. And I just looked back just to January. If you put this next, this is from Politico. This shows the disconnect among the ruling class. This is from Politico in January. British public should be ready to fight Putin, UK Army chief says. So on the one hand, we got to get ready to fight Putin. But when it comes down to brass tacks, they say we don't have any ammunition, we don't have any people, and we can't do it.
So the UK Defence Secretary Shapps said that the situation in which the UK would fight Russia alone is unlikely. And I wrote a big surprise.
Yeah.
So
that's why I think it's dangerous, because we had Macron last week talking about we want to put some French soldiers in Ukraine. Russia said, okay, they're going to be a priority target. I think what these countries are doing is they are assuming that NATO is the U.S. and the U.S. will back them up. And I think that's dangerous, because I think it causes them to do reckless things like this, like being tougher than they should be when they don't have anything behind them.
See, I think that this is going to continue, and it's going to get less effective than ever because eventually we're out of money and we're losing people's trust in us and expectations, so they will lose confidence in the dollar, and all this stuff will have to cease. But because that involves subjectivity in how people react and how foreigners react to us, because they don't seem to think that we'll ever quit sending them money, but eventually we'll quit sending them money with value, and that's when the whole thing would end.
Man has been called a rational being, but rationality is a matter of choice. The key to what you so recklessly call human nature, the open secret you live with yet dread to name, is the fact that man is a being of volitional consciousness. Reason does not work automatically. Thinking is not a mechanical process. The connections of logic are not made by instinct. A being of volitional consciousness has no automatic course of behavior. He needs a code of values to guide his actions. Value presupposes an answer to the question of value to whom and for what. Value presupposes a standard, a purpose, and the necessity of action in the face of an alternative. When there are no alternatives, no values are possible. There is only one fundamental alternative in the universe, existence or non-existence, and it pertains to a single class of entities, to living organisms. The existence of inanimate matter is unconditional. The existence of life is not. It depends on a specific course of action. Matter is indestructible. It changes its forms, but it cannot cease to exist. It is only a living organism that faces a constant alternative, the issue of life or death. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. If an organism fails in that action, it dies. Its chemical elements remain, but its life goes out of existence. It is only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. It is only to a living entity that things can be good or evil. A plant must feed itself in order to live. The sunlight, the water, the chemicals it needs are the values its nature has set it to pursue. Its life is the standard of value directing its actions. But a plant has no choice of action. There are alternatives in the conditions it encounters, but there is no alternative in its function. It acts automatically to further its life. It cannot act for its own destruction. An animal is equipped for sustaining its life. Its senses provided with an automatic code of action, an automatic knowledge of what is good for it or evil. It has no power to extend its knowledge or to evade it. In conditions where its knowledge proves inadequate, it dies. But so long as it lives, it acts on its knowledge. With automatic safety and no power of choice, it is unable to ignore its own good, unable to decide to choose the evil and act as its own destroyer. Man has no automatic code of survival. His particular distinction from all other living species is the necessity to act in the face of alternatives, by means of volitional choice. He has no automatic knowledge of what is good for him or evil, what values his life depends on, what course of action it requires. An instinct of self-preservation is precisely what man does not possess. An instinct is an unerring and automatic form of knowledge. A desire is not an instinct. A desire to live does not give you the knowledge required for living. And even man's desire to live is not automatic.
So a new Gallup poll has found that the majority of Americans disapprove of Israel's military actions in Gaza, which have killed over 32,000 Palestinians, including over 13,000 children. And it has put the entire population of the Gaza Strip on the brink of famine. So asked if they approve or disapprove of Israel's military actions, 55% of respondents said they disapproved, while only 36% said that they approved of the onslaught. So this is an increase from the last time Gallup asked this question in a poll. In November 2023, they released a poll that found more people approved of Israel's military campaign. It found that 50% of Americans approved of Israel's military campaign, while 45% disapproved. So as this thing goes on, which isn't a surprise, more and more people are souring on it, especially as they see all the horrific images and videos coming out of Gaza. I know this was probably conducted before that video came out last week, but that video of that drone strike of those 4 unarmed men and the 2 that were killed while they were trying to get away, limping away, I think that really opened a lot of eyes and has woken a lot of people up. But again, that was probably after this poll was conducted. So favorability for Israel is strongest among Republicans, with 64% approving Israel's assault on Gaza in the latest poll. So 64% of Republicans, that's how it's broken down from the latest poll. 64% of Republicans approve what Israel's doing, 29% of independents do, and only 18% of Democrats say that they approved Israel's campaign. And so since October 7th, polling has consistently shown that the majority of American voters favor a ceasefire in Gaza. The latest poll released by Data for Progress that asked about this found that 67% of Americans favored the U.S. pushing for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And that included 77% of Democrats, 69% of independents, and 56% of Republicans. So it's a majority across the board saying that they want a ceasefire. It's really something to see the numbers when it comes to Democrats pretty overwhelmingly are against what Israel's doing here, yet Biden continues this full-throated support for this slaughter of Palestinians. And the Biden administration has consistently opposed the idea of a ceasefire unless it's linked to some sort of hostage deal. But even then, they're making it very clear, just like Israel and Netanyahu, that they don't want a permanent ceasefire. They just want a temporary one for some sort of hostage release. That was Kamala Harris was given some speech, and she said, "Oh, we need an immediate ceasefire," and everybody cheered. And while everybody was cheering, she said, "For 6 weeks." It's just a joke. I mean, when people are asked if they want a ceasefire, it seems very reasonable and logical for them. The idea of ending this horrific massacre that's happening in Gaza. So hopefully this growing opposition among Americans has some impact on Biden and what they're doing. So a British general admitted on Tuesday that the UK could not handle a war with Russia for more than 2 months, as London has significantly depleted its military stockpiles by arming Ukraine. So Lieutenant General Robert McGowan, the Deputy Chief of the Defense Staff, made the comments during a British Parliament hearing where he was urging for more military spending. MP Mark Francois, a member of the Conservative Party, asked McGowan if it was true that the UK, quote, could not fight Putin for more than a couple months in a full-on shooting war because we don't have the ammunition and the reserves of equipment to do it, end quote. So McGowan said, yeah, you're right. Basically said that's true. We could only last 2 months probably. But not to worry, British Defense Minister Grant Shapps, he was at the hearing and he downplayed this lack of British military readiness, saying that any war with Russia will be fought alongside NATO allies. And he referred to Article 5 of the alliance's treaty that outlines mutual defense commitments. So he said, quote, for people watching and hearing that the UK isn't ready for war exclusively with Russia, it's important to understand that because we are in NATO and Article 5 exists, we would never be in that situation. So don't worry. We'll have the US come fight with us. They'll take care of it. So these comments came after a report from the House of Commons Defense Committee found that the British military was increasingly overstretched and was not ready for a war with Russia. Back in December, the Times of London reported that the UK had nothing left in its military stockpiles after sending so many weapons to Ukraine. So despite all of this, the sorry state of the UK's military, the UK has been one of the most belligerent NATO countries, of this proxy war, and one of the most involved when it comes to troops being on the ground. There was that recent recording of German military officers that was published by Russian media that revealed British soldiers are on the ground in Ukraine helping them use the Storm Shadow missiles. So very belligerent, very bellicose. The British have been, and British officials have said all sorts of crazy stuff. And it goes to show, when we talk about NATO and these entangling alliances, these countries, these smaller countries that don't have big militaries, they wouldn't be this belligerent if they didn't have this war guarantee from the U.S. that goes for the Philippines. And, I'm always talking about that. And when discussing this, I think a lot about Lithuania. Earlier in the war, Lithuania tried to blockade Kaliningrad, which is that Russian oblast that's separate from Russia. It's in between Lithuania and Poland on the Baltic Sea, but it's like Alaska is to the U.S. It's Russian territory. And Lithuania tried to cut off all the rail transport that was going there. And they never would have done that. Never would have done that if they weren't in NATO.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Oh, you don't believe me about this going on over there with the banksters? 5 banks have a combined $500 billion in commercial real estate loans. Again, I keep saying the only site to go to if you want great bankster information is Wall Street on Parade. Russ and Pam Martin is what they're doing, boy. It's great. Number 1, JP Morgan Chase. Yesterday, American Banker released a report showing that 5 banks in the U.S. hold a combined $500 billion in commercial real estate loans. Huh. Oh, you mean commercial real estate loans? One of our covers, the Trends Journal magazine, and one of our top 10 trends was office building bust. Oh, those commercial. Oh, we've only been talking about this since they launched the COVID war. Oh, your office, downtown Portland's office vacancy rate is highest in the nation. 30.2% in the Pearl District by the end of 2023. That's up from 26.6% a year earlier. And it just keeps going on. In one place after another. The average, 6th highest in the country. Portland's downtown office rate was the 6th highest in the country at 29.7. 29.7. You got New York, it's 23%. Vacant. Nobody in the buildings. Got it? The banks are going to go bust. No one is talking about it. Oh, S&P Global downgrades outlooks on 5 regional U.S. banks to negative. Oh, let's not make that news. No, let's not talk about that. Hey, the markets went up. There's going to be a banking bust. That's why you're seeing gold going where it is. The smart people know where it's going. And then we're going to have World War III has begun. The thing's only going to escalate. When Brent crude hits $130 a barrel, say goodbye to the equity markets and the economy. New York City delinquency property taxes soar. Oh, great. Overdue property taxes are forecast to reach its highest level ever, jumping by over 30%. Oh, yeah. At the end of the fiscal year in June. The overall vacancy rate for Manhattan office stood at 22.5 in November. It's now at almost 23%. Vacant. Your office occupancy rate, according to Castle in the United States, of the 10 largest cities, a little over 50%. All the businesses that depended on commuters going out of business. Portland, what a great town it used to be. And now it's a shithole. One after another. San Francisco, yeah. One after another. And the Israel war heating up. This is from AP. Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon killed 9 people, including paramedics. Oh, so you can't call that anti-Semite because AP wrote it. Killing paramedics. Now the numbers, by the way, up to 13. Israeli airstrikes killed 9 people in southern Lebanon late Wednesday, including paramedics who were preparing to respond to the first state-run national event. Yeah, that rises the number of people killed by Israel on Wednesday to 16. Israel could bomb anybody they want, but then when the Lebanese retaliate, they call them militants. That's the horse shit. That's the horse shit that these little fucking scumbag prostitutes push out. So now, get this in your head. Let's say you lived in Algeria. And the French were, French Foreign Legion French go in there, rob and steal, rape, pillage, and plunder everything you got, and you're an Algerian. You're fighting them back. Does that make you a terrorist? Does that make you a terrorist? If somebody came to America, tried to kill us all, and we fought them back, does that make us terrorists? No. You're defending them. You're getting rid of the colonizers. But when America attacks Iraq, when America attacks Vietnam, when America attacks Afghanistan, the people fighting back are militants and terrorists. Same thing in the West Bank. Israel can steal all the land they want, kill anybody they'd want. When the people fight back, they're terrorists. All right, moving on. And again, what happened in Russia, in Moscow, with the bombing of that concert place, we warned about this happening. We said it's going to continue to escalate, and it has. And here you go. Russia says evidence links concert hall attackers to, quote, Ukrainian nationalists. This is Reuters. Russian investigators said on Thursday, today, they had uncovered evidence that the gunmen who killed more than 140 people in an attack on a concert hall near Moscow last week were linked to, quote, Ukrainian nationalists. This is how they ended up. Western security analysts. What Western security analysts? A bunch of fucking losers. I'm a security analyst. Say the attack raised questions about the resourcing and priorities of Russian intelligence agencies that have been heavily focused on the Ukraine war and the need to stamp out opposition to it within Russia. Hey, Western security analysts. Did you ever hear of 9/11? Did you ever hear about that one? Oh, where were you guys? The Russians are fucking stupid shitheads because they didn't see this coming. But hey, 9/11. I know. It was the end of the summer vacation. You forgot to look. Security analysts. It's a fucking joke.
And Putin's made it pretty clear that NATO fighting in Ukraine is tantamount to him of NATO fighting, Russian territory. And then you've got, Russia, the need to defend its survival. And then you get all kinds of scary escalatory scenarios about what happens if Russia has to defend its territory. So what you get here is you get this, I don't know what's going to happen, but you get this really dangerous possibility that people have been afraid of for so long, that this war in Ukraine that has no real security interest to the West risks escalating into a possible, world war between nuclear powers. And, Putin reminded the world that there is only one reason why countries have nuclear weapons. He says, we're not going to do it. We don't think you need to do it. We don't think it's going to be a nuclear war. But he says, remember, nuclear weapons are there so that if the sovereignty, integrity, and existence of your country is a threat, you have nuclear weapons. And then you get Macron responding that, Putin shouldn't say that because we're a nuclear power and we're ready. And so all of a sudden you've got the president of Russia and the president of France engaging in this conversation about the potential of nuclear war and who wanted to be there, over this, this fight in Ukraine. So you get this really sort of scary situation. And you've got Europe fighting each other. You've got Germany mad at France for saying it, and France mad at Germany for leaking it, and NATO's falling apart. And you get this whole terrible scenario.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it goes right to the heart of the contradiction of the entire thing. They started this war with their insistence that nothing can stop us from bringing Ukraine into NATO. And if we can't do it this year right now, we're going to do it de facto. We're going to integrate their military with ours as best as we can. We're going to focus on interoperability. And we're going to spend the entire autumn of 2021 telling the Russians, you're damn right, we're bringing Ukraine into NATO, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. And then as soon as the war starts, Biden says there is a 0% chance that we are sending the Army, the Navy, the Marines in to fight this war. 82nd Airborne will be in Moldova. The 3rd Infantry Division will be, in Virginia, wherever they sit around, in Germany. The Navy will be sailing in circles in the Black Sea. This is not our fight. And we are not going to war with Russia over Ukraine, which is the same thing as saying you're not allowed into NATO because we're not going to fight for you if it comes down to it. And so here we are. Now they're stuck in this contradiction. They're like, well, maybe we should escalate and fight for them a little more and a little more and a little more at a time. When that completely contradicts the theory of the case, which is if we went that far, we'd end up in a general nuclear war.
That's part of the fear, I think, when I talk to people about why these leaks are coming out about troops in Ukraine. The scariest scenario of all was that it was to prepare for escalation, with the idea being that it would lay the groundwork for sending more troops. The idea being that you can sell more troops by desensitizing the West by pointing out that there's already troops there. We've already taken the risk. How much more of a risk is it to send more? So one of the possibilities about why all these leaks came out, and I guess we still need to talk about these, so we haven't told you what we're talking about yet, but one of the reasons why all these leaks came out in this 2-week period, the scariest scenario, I think, is that it is to prepare for the possibility of sending more by convincing the West by saying, look, we've already sent some and Putin didn't respond. How much more of a risk is it to send more? But that's a very dangerous game because people like to play this game of knowing Putin's mind, but nobody knows what the red line is. How many, is it acceptable for Putin to have a few Western troops giving targeting information for long-range missiles, but is it acceptable to send in hundreds of troops? Is it acceptable to be, actually in the fight? A French general, the head of the French armed forces, wrote a paper in Le Monde, I think yesterday, saying that France could get together a force of, I think he said 20,000 soldiers. Like, is that crossing the line for Putin? So it's a very dangerous game.
Yeah, well, and you're right that they keep doing that, and the War Party this has been their mantra now, this whole time is, well, he hasn't nuked us yet. He hasn't nuked us yet, and this Emily Harding from the Center for Strategic and International Studies was in, I guess, last month in February. They did this symposium, and of course, CSIS is sponsored all by the military-industrial complex. You can read it right on their website. And she says, we've been fiddling while Rome burns, and we've been debating, she says, we've been debating amongst ourselves, like exactly what tiny weapon system is going to push us over the top or not for 2 years. And if we hadn't been dithering earlier on, there's a little Sarah Palin idiocy thrown in there for you. If we hadn't been dithering, if we had actually provided the things that we should have provided, we would have been much better off now. She just claims like, oh yeah, the tanks, the artillery systems, whatever she has in mind, definitely would have made the difference. She explains no argument why we should believe that that's true. It just goes without saying. And then she says, I love this, it's self-centered of Americans to worry that if they do this, it will provoke Russia into widening the war, because she says that just hasn't happened. But she's the one saying we haven't given enough weapons yet. We haven't done what it takes. So she's saying the fact that they haven't nuked us yet means that they definitely won't. And then I just love this because it could come out of the mouth of Sarah Palin or John McCain or your junior high school reading teacher who doesn't know the first thing about it. She says, Russia's a bully. They respond to strength. And it's like, she's going to get my home state nuked off the face of the earth with this crap.
Snuck it in the bill, just like we said. This is why we don't like omnibus. This is like we like regular order, so you can go down to the floor and make an amendment and cut this money out. But a controversial measure to include $15 million for the electronic tracking of livestock has made it through Congress via the recently passed omnibus bill, raising fears among critics that the new system could be weaponized by the government to limit beef consumption. Weaponized. That's what they do. Put on the next one. Now, this is from the article. American cattle rancher Shad Sullivan told the Epoch Times, we can put that second one up, he fears the tags will be the end of the small rancher. And you mentioned this earlier. And here's what Sullivan, the farmer said, the rancher said, they're going to use it as a taxing mechanism that could eventually control the livestock. In the European Union, they use these measures under the guise of climate change lies to limit the cattle supply. And if they do that here, it will destroy our industry. If the tag mandate is implemented, it will be the key to open the door to the gas chamber for independent ranching.
I think it's a certain month that they have to have this done. If I'm not mistaken, it might be 18 months or something like that. But I can just see if they have a calf and they're using it for the meat market, and it's right before they're able to sell it and they haven't been tagged. Can you imagine if they say, well, you're not tagged and you can't sell it, all of a sudden those prices are going to crash or something. Anyway, whatever they're doing is interference, not only interference with the beef market, but it's interfering with our freedoms. And it's the idea that they can come in and regulate, and this one's, it's not going to be a big deal, but I think that this is the kind of stuff that is creeping, it just creeps up, creeping welfare, socialism, fascism, the whole works, a little bit here, a little bit there. Pretty soon we don't have much of our liberties left, much left decision-making on our own part.
And so shockingly, Robert writes, if a global conflagration involving the United States were to break out, just 6% of Americans say they would enlist for military service, while 9% say they would not volunteer but would serve if called up, a whopping 9%, and 13% say they would not volunteer and would refuse to serve if called up. Meanwhile, a whopping 60% say the armed forces would not attempt to draft them due to age or disability, i.e., however, in the event the U.S. finds itself under imminent threat of invasion, the percentage of people who would volunteer for military service increased to 16%. However, 47% say even in such extreme circumstances, they don't think the military would want them.
Right. But, this this is interesting because the war was stopped in the 60s. The Vietnam War was stopped by people demonstrating and violent. And actually, Kent State was, I think, it was the message. We're getting nearing the end. It didn't end immediately, but that was the message when our own soldiers were shooting at people who were demonstrating. Said, enough is enough. We don't want any more of this war and killing. And they weren't talking about 10 here and 10 there. There were large numbers of people. And there was a draft was going on. So there was great reason. But what we're trying to do here is point out how things get like that, how they get out of hand, and what you should believe in. And in this case, they should. I reject the whole notion of a military draft because they try to stop compulsory work and slavery. This is a slavery when they tell you what to do. See, I think there's two ways you can enslave a people. One is be able to draft them and send them off to war or whatever they want them to do, and the second one is take all their money, and so everybody's income belongs to the government unless they allow you to keep a little bit. So that's the way that works. So this is part of our project, is try to get people to understand this, and when we see this means that I understand it, but it doesn't mean, oh, good, the trend will continue. And, the next crowd that gets in there, and say, well, we have to do it. We have to do it. Unfortunately, we always say they're not going to invade us, but now we have a form of invasion. We have to sort that out awfully fast.
The thing about polling is that on one hand, it's satisfying because it gives you a snapshot of where people's heads are. But snapshots can be frustrating because you want to know more of the story behind this. Even a good photo, you want to know the story behind the photo. So it would be interesting to get in the heads of these people who answered this and figure out why they said, heck no, I won't go when it comes to war. Because one of my early thoughts when I was trying to ponder what this might mean is that we have a disconnect in the U.S. between an aggressive foreign policy and really being up close to the direct results of that foreign policy. You can cheer on an invasion of Iraq knowing that you'll never have to serve. You'll never have to have bombs drop in your house in Kentucky or wherever you live. So I think in a way this kind of, it's almost like a moral hazard. It causes a lot of Americans to be more aggressive on their foreign policy because they know the chances of a bomb landing, at least until this latest dust up with Russia, the chances of Saddam actually being able to bomb you were pretty low. So I wonder if that makes people more willing to engage in risky foreign policy, or whether people are genuinely getting sick of this aggressive foreign policy and saying, I have such a disconnect with the elites in Washington and the neocons who push this foreign policy. I don't want any part of it. And if they get us in another war, let them go fight it. Stick Newland on the front line. I wonder.
I don't know where there's a real fight going on where we're not involved, and how often not only getting involved after the fighting began, but what about how we instigate it? Like in Ukraine. I mean, without us involved there, I don't believe there'd be a war going on there.
Because there wouldn't have been a coup. Ukraine would probably be trading with Russia and trading with the EU, and they'd be a lot richer, and about 500,000 more of them would be alive. So. Right. But the other thing that I was thinking about this is that, say it's the case that they just don't want to go to war, and they don't care about what's happening. But the thing is, I think our argument would be, listen, when the war breaks out, when the missiles come, when they start putting the draft up, it's going to happen like that. And you're going to go. I remember you talked about when you were drafted during the Cuban Missile Crisis. My father was also drafted at the same time. There's no joking around. When that came, you had to go, and that's what happened. So I would say that, especially if these are young people that feel this way now, the time to fight against this is now, because once the war breaks out, you're not going to fight to stop the war. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, they didn't check on our social conditions. I was trying desperately to finish up a residency, and at the same time, our family was working on our third child. And boom, you get ready and go. And that didn't turn out to be the worst experience I've ever had, but I sort of had to psychologically adapt to it because I wasn't willing to do some things I wasn't willing to be a domestic hero. But I decided very definitely over those years, my thoughts and my beliefs were conditioned to believe that this is a big deal, and there's ways to do that. And the more informed I got is, yes, it's not complex. Why don't we just follow the Constitution? Why were we in that Vietnam War? It wasn't even a declared war. What a tragedy.
Your fear of death is not a love of life, and will not give you the knowledge needed to keep it. Man must obtain his knowledge and choose his actions by a process of thinking, which nature will not force him to perform. Man has the power to act as his own destroyer, and that is the way he has acted through most of his history. A living entity that regarded its means of survival as evil would not survive. A plant that struggled to mangle its roots, a bird that fought to break its wings, would not remain for long in the existence they affronted. But the history of man has been a struggle to deny and to destroy his mind. Man has been called a rational being, but rationality is a matter of choice, and the alternative his nature offers him is rational being or suicidal animal. Man has to be man by choice. He has to hold his life as a value by choice. He has to learn to sustain it by choice. He has to discover the values it requires and practice his virtues by choice. A code of values accepted by choice is a code of morality. Whoever you are, you who are hearing me now, I am speaking to whatever living remnant is left uncorrupted within you, to the remnant of the human, to your mind, and I say there is a morality of reason, a morality proper to man, and man's life is its standard of value. All that which is proper to the life of a rational being is the good. All that which destroys it is the evil. Man's life, as required by his nature, is not the life of a mindless brute, of a looting thug or a mooching mystic, but the life of a thinking being. Not life by means of force or fraud, but life by means of achievement. Man's life is the standard of morality, but your own life is its purpose. If existence on earth is your goal, you must choose your actions and values by the standard of that which is proper to man, for the purpose of preserving, fulfilling, and enjoying the irreplaceable value, which is your life. Are you beginning to see who is John Galt? I am the man who has earned the thing you did not fight for. Somewhere within you, you still long to say what I am now saying to the hearing of the whole of mankind. I am proud of my own value and of the fact that I wish to live. But it is a wish one must learn to deserve. Virtue is not an end in itself. Virtue is not its own reward. Life is the reward of virtue, and happiness is the goal and the reward of life.
So Israel believes that only 60 to 70 Israeli hostages in Gaza are alive out of the 134 people and bodies that are being held in the Strip, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is sabotaging chances for a hostage deal with Hamas. And this was reported by Haaretz on Thursday. So the Israeli military previously confirmed at least 36 of the hostages had been killed. That was something I remember covering a few months ago, that Israel said around 30 of the hostages were killed. And that includes some who actually died on October 7th, and some of them were brought back into Gaza when they were already dead. They brought the bodies back. And a source told Haaretz that now only 60 to 70 are still alive, and actually said that the number may even be lower than that. And of course, we can't know for sure exactly how all these hostages died, but I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that many were, if not all of them, were killed by the Israeli bombing campaign, or maybe of disease or starvation due to the Israeli blockade. I'm sure it seems to me that it would be in Hamas's interest to keep these hostages alive. So we know there have been some confirmed cases of Israel killing Israeli hostages inside Gaza. Some of the Israeli hostages who were freed in the initial and the only hostage deal that was reached that led to a 1-week truce back in November. Some of them said after they got out that their primary fear while being held in Gaza was being killed by Israel's relentless bombing campaign. In December, Israeli troops gunned down 3 Israeli hostages who were shirtless and waving a white flag in Gaza City. I'm sure everybody remembers that. And then there was also a mother of an Israeli who died in Gaza, and she's alleged that her son was killed by poison gas. And, the thing that people, and she was citing a toxicology report, and what immediately went to people's minds was maybe Israel was pumping gas into the tunnels. Then I saw there was a report in Israeli media that said the Israeli military is aware that bombing the tunnels could create toxic gas, such as carbon monoxide, which risks killing the captive Israelis that are down there. So this news of the estimate that only 60 to 70 hostages remain alive comes as family members of Israelis being held in Gaza are increasing the pressure on Netanyahu to reach a deal. So some of these family members held a meeting with Netanyahu on Thursday, and beforehand, one of them said, quote, "Prime Minister Netanyahu, the responsibility to bring our sons home is yours. At the request of the state and the security forces, we stayed silent until today. They scared us. Today, we understand that as the number of days of silence grows, the number of boys who return home alive decreases," end quote. So Russian investigators said Thursday that they found evidence connecting the terrorist attack on a concert hall outside of Moscow to Ukrainian nationalists. Investigators have verified, so this is a quote from the Russian Investigative Committee. This is a statement they put out. They said, quote, "Investigators have verified information that large amounts of money and cryptocurrency that the perpetrators of the terrorist attack received traced back to Ukraine. The funds were used in preparing the crime. Investigators work with the detained terrorists, the examination of technical equipment that was seized from them, and the analysis of information about financial transactions prove their connection to Ukrainian nationalists," end quote. So Russia is now saying that they have evidence linking these people to Ukrainian nationalists, and it's not clear exactly what that means. But it's, if Russia determines that Ukraine was behind this, or things could really escalate, and by extension, they would view it as an attack backed by the U.S. This article, I wrote this article, but it's based on a New York Times report that said the U.S. did not share all the information it had about a terrorist plot in Russia ahead of the shooting at a concert hall outside of Moscow that killed over 140 people. The paper said, quote, "The adversarial relationship between Washington and Moscow prevented U.S. officials from sharing any information about the plot beyond what was necessary out of fear Russian authorities might learn their intelligence sources or methods," end quote. So it's basically saying that they didn't give them all the information that they had about this attack because of the relationship with, because of the state of relations with Russia. I mean, that's all it is here. And this reminds me, I think it was like the day before this happened, Scott Horton sent me an article from Washington Times about ISIS-K, and it was saying, well, ISIS-K is targeting Iran, the Taliban, Russia, and the U.S. is in this awkward position where they don't know if they should share the intelligence with their adversaries because they don't want them to use the intelligence to their advantage. So basically saying that they don't want to help stop ISIS attacks because they don't want to give too much information to these countries. So in response to the report, the Kremlin responded, and Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman, said that he was unaware of information about the U.S. withholding intelligence, and he also cast doubt on the report. He said, quote, "The information of the New York Times citing sources is information that should be treated with great caution," end quote. So this article is from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute, and it says, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, says that he will work to pass a massive military aid bill for Ukraine and Israel once Congress returns to session next week, a move that could trigger a backlash from some members of his party. House Democrats have vowed that they will protect Johnson if some Republicans try to kick him out from the speakership. House Democrats are saying that they're willing to not vote against him to save him. So Johnson has underscored the urgency of providing aid to Ukraine and Israel, declaring it a top priority upon the House's return from Easter recess. He said, quote, "We'll turn our attention to it and we won't delay on that," end quote. So we'll see. I mean, the status of this bill, this is a $95 billion foreign military aid bill. It includes aid for Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel. The thing is a monstrosity.
Who in the government is going to make the assurances required for Julian Assange's extradition? Can they somehow be made to be legally binding for U.S. courts given the division of powers principle? So the answer to your first question reflects a decision of the High Court of Great Britain, roughly their Supreme Court, not the same situation as ours, but roughly 2 members of their Supreme Court, who said that Assange could be extradited if the U.S. could assure, A, that he would be treated as if he were an American citizen, B, that his First Amendment rights would be respected, and C, that he wouldn't be exposed to the death penalty. So you have judges in Great Britain asking the American Justice Department to assure something that only an American federal judge could guarantee. So the assurances are not worth the empty words that will come out of the mouths of the Justice Department lawyers, meaning they could make all the assurances they want, but there's no way that those assurances can be guaranteed. Because, as you point out so nicely in the second part of your question, that we have the separation of powers principle in America. The legislative branch, the Congress writes the laws, the executive branch, the president and the people that work for him enforce the laws, the judicial branch interprets the laws, and the executive branch cannot bind the judicial branch. These assurances are effectively meaningless. Thus, the ruling is effectively meaningless. It's just a way for the establishment in Great Britain to extradite Julian to the United States and attempting to put the onus on the United States rather than on its own gutless judiciary, which is not independent like ours is. Ours is not always independent, but many judges are. In Great Britain, you'd be very hard-pressed to find judges or justices that are. You could probably fit them all in a bathtub because they all come from the same elite core of British society, which is very, 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 three verys, pro-government. In my own view, of course, Assange did not commit a crime, should not have been indicted. I think many of you have heard me say this. I thought I had talked then President Trump into pardoning him, and I think I had. And then the people around Trump changed his mind. And of course, he hasn't been pardoned. On the contrary, he's been tormented in a windowless subterranean cell in the basement of a London prison, conditions far worse than what he would be in if he had been convicted in the United States of espionage. Why is it not a crime? Because the Supreme Court has said that a member of the media, could be the New York Times or it could be Judging Freedom, it could be any member of the media that reveals matters to the public that are of material interest to the public, is immune from civil and criminal liability, no matter what's revealed, no matter how they got it, and no matter what they say. But the Obama administration, to its credit, elected not to indict Assange. The Trump administration under then Attorney General Bill Barr elected to do so. Okay, next question. From Patrick Jean-Claude. Patrick, where have you been? You usually pepper us with dozens of questions. I'm kidding, and I'm grateful for your questions always, Patrick. Judge, former U.S. President Obama visited United Kingdom Prime Minister Sunak at 10 Downing Street in London. This was just the other day, sparking speculation about their meeting. Do we know the subject of this meeting? Thanks and Godspeed. Thanks and Godspeed to you as well, Patrick. We don't know the subject of the meeting. It got very, very little notice in the press. Usually, if a former president meets a current head of state, the two of them want to maximize publicity on this. Neither of them wanted any publicity on it. I don't know if it has to do with Ukraine or Gaza or Joe Biden. I do know that Barack Obama is terrified that Donald Trump may beat Joe Biden and, in President Obama's view, undo much of what President Obama and President Biden did. As we speak, literally, the two of them, along with former President Bill Clinton, are arriving in New York City to go to Radio City Music Hall. It's called Music Hall. It's actually just the largest theater in New York City before you get into an arena like Madison Square Garden, but it holds about 2,500 or 3,000 people for a fundraiser for Joe Biden tonight. They expect to raise, after expenses are paid, about $25 million. Hard to believe, but Joe Biden has trebled the amount of money that Donald Trump has raised. But why the conversation with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Great Britain? Your guess is as good as mine. And members of Congress as individuals be prosecuted for war crimes and genocide of the Palestinian people. Do they have immunity? They do have immunity. They cannot be prosecuted for anything they do, any vote they take on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate, any position they articulate there, any position they articulate in a House or Senate committee meeting, or on their way to or on their way from Congress. The reason for this clause is because British kings were notorious for prosecuting members of Parliament when they voted against the king's wishes. And Madison was aware of that when he wrote the Constitution, and he made sure that this immunity clause was in there.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
understand, Robert, why. I mean, let's put that last picture up there. Yeah, well, we got the guy. I guess, I should say in defense of White House press secretaries, they do not make the decision. They're the person that gets sent out to say what we can and can't talk about. My sense is that they don't make the decision about whether you're not going to or not going to talk about the drone program. But do you think that the White House has been sufficiently forthcoming? We have these 7 memos right now. We haven't seen any of those. The white paper got released right before Brennan by the White House, but leaked apparently. Do you think that you've been sufficiently forthcoming and the White House has been sufficiently forthcoming on this stuff? Well, I think you've seen recently the president discuss the need and desire to be more forthcoming. I certainly think there are aspects of that program that are and will remain highly sensitive and very secret. But let me give you an example here, Chris. When I went through the process of becoming press secretary, one of the first things they told me was, you're not even to acknowledge the drone program. You're not even to discuss that it exists. And so I would get a question like that, and literally I couldn't tell you what major asked, because once I figured out it was about the drone program, I realized I'm not supposed to talk about it. But here's what's inherently crazy about that proposition. You're being asked a question based on reporting of a program that exists. Right? So you're the official government spokesperson acting as if the entire program, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I think in many ways, and I think what the president has seen, and I'm not talking about this, I want to be careful, this is my opinion, but I think what the president has seen is our denial of the existence of the program, when it's obviously happening, undermines people's confidence overall in the decisions that their government makes. And in order to bolster that confidence and bolster the belief that we're making those correct decisions on this policy, you do have to lift the veil some to both acknowledge that it exists, as he's done, but also to do it in a way that provides better understanding. I will say, ironically, the time in which the president probably talked most about the drone program, interestingly enough, was in an interview on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. So going back to that earlier discussion, well, why do you give this person or that person an interview? Jon Stewart asked a good question and then gave the president the space to give an answer. And my sense is that even though you might say, well, I watched Jon Stewart, and Jon Stewart probably votes for Barack Obama other than Mitt Romney, John asks a very smart question and then gives the president the space to give him an answer, and probably would have held him accountable if he would have not. Oh, yeah.
All right. So that's what I wanted to get out of that clip. So this is pre-Trump, pre-election denial. This is the standard of integrity that MSNBC had. And by the way, of course, this is just one person who was hired there out of, we could have picked 1,000. You know what I mean? You could have picked John Brennan or whoever. They hired the head of the CIA to come be a what do you call it? A contributor at the network. But here you have Robert Gibbs, who is talking to them about how he had to lie in his previous job and how there was a program that did exist, and it was a program of what? A mass murder program. A pretty serious thing to be asked about. And he's talking about how his job was to mislead the press about it, and they all giggle and laugh as they hired him, and he just went on to be a contributor at MSNBC. So I'm sorry, but all of this outrage about this is not like the press secretary who was lying about a mass murder campaign. This was the head of the RNC. She's organizing support for candidates. This is nothing compared to some of the monsters that they've hired over there at this network. So all of this outrage about oh my God, she's admitting that she wasn't completely telling the truth in her previous position. Oh my God, how horrible this is. It's all complete bullshit. Just all bullshit. This is who they are. This is who that sacred network employs. Scum like this. And by the way, the other thing about it that's just really something is that as he's talking about this, he's kind of going through this thing, and he's like, it's weird because you're getting the first my instructions were you are not to acknowledge the existence of a drone program. And then he's like, I think I'm getting asked about this drone program, and I don't even think I heard the question because I'm like, oh, I can't answer this one. And they're all laughing. Like the panel, all of them are giggling along, what a funny predicament to be in where you got to lie about this mass murder campaign. That's what was going on in the administration before Donald Trump's. So I don't think there's anything so unique about MSNBC hiring an unimpressive liar. Seems par for the course. But it does seem to be a theme with the time that we're living in, that more and more dirt is getting exposed. And I do think there's at least part of that is a very positive thing. I guess that's all I'll say.
I think we also kind of live in a landscape now where people don't just want to consume your art. They kind of want to consume you. And so if off stage you're a total dickhead and on stage you got some sort of a likable brand where, it's almost like everything's almost like being a church pastor now. If you've had 14 affairs or 3 families that you've left, you kind of can't get up and preach. Not that what we do is preach, but I'm just saying, but
there's a comparison there that it's like if we were doing something that is totally contrary to how we portray ourselves on the podcast, then that should be damaging.
Yeah, and so some of these Hollywood characters, it's your likability is what sells. And so if your brand is that and you're a total dickhead off air, people start finding out about that. I guess it will hamper your career.
Yeah, no, and I do think there's it's got to be a scary time for people who aren't really living it. You know what I mean? Like for people who aren't really living the persona that they project. I'd imagine it's got to be people are like, oh man, anyone could find out about this. But look, this is what's nice. I guess what's kind of freeing about the fact that, and I'm not saying me and you aren't flawed people. We certainly are. I'm just saying that we really are what you see. There's no like big secret afterward where we're like going, oh man, we got him again today. And there's not, but it would be, man, what a scary time it would be to be someone like that. Or even just like, if you were like cheating on your wife or something like that, and you're a person in the public eye, it's not like before. It's like that you could just get ruined at any moment for that. Like there are screenshots, there's proof, there's all this stuff that can just be posted, and then that's it. You're done. And I think there's something positive about that. Like there's just the penalty for being dishonest is more present and more, and there should be some type of penalty for being a fraud. And like, yeah, if your whole thing is that you believe in free speech, and then meanwhile you're locking down everybody who works at your company to not be able to say anything if you mistreat them, then like that's fairly contradictory in spirit. And so I think that's a good thing if that gets exposed. And like, and certainly if someone like P. Diddy or someone like that's doing really awful things to people, then like, yeah, that's great if that gets exposed. So
it's essential to understand the fact that the founding generation had just fought a long, bloody war to get away from the unlimited centralized power of the British, which was mostly expressed in the Declaratory Act of 1766, claiming power over the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The old revolutionaries cited this over and over and over as the root cause. I've covered that in some detail in an episode, which will be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, with some other interesting information along with all the original source documents. Alan Mosley will get that organized, and I'll have it published at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty a couple hours after this live stream is done. And that'll include, for example, this letter from Thomas Jefferson to Joseph C. Cabell. He said, "What has destroyed liberty in every government which has ever existed under the sun? The generalizing and concentrating of all cares and power into one body." Now, Jefferson certainly understood what it was like to live under the largest government in history at the time, and now we're also living under the largest government in history once again. And now Samuel Adams made a very important observation in this letter to Elbridge Gerry in 1789, recognizing that consolidation was a greater problem, or a huge problem, when you have people who have different viewpoints, because then it just requires violence to force your way. And he didn't get into that, but that's really where you go with this. He said, I think really he's hinting at that. "I am fully persuaded that the people of the United States, being in different climates, of different education and manners, and possessed of different habits and feelings, under one consolidated government, cannot long remain free, or indeed under any kind of government but despotism." So in other words, you can have a very diverse society as long as you are very much decentralized. The more centralized, the more diverse you have in your views on religion, culture, society, politics, economics, whatever it may be, the more you have diversity in that, the more dangerous it is to have a centralized state. And that's why we have huge problems today under the largest government in history. John Lansing in the New York Ratifying Convention put it this way: "A consolidated government could not preserve the essential rights and liberties of the people." And Patrick Henry hammered it home with this: "Consolidation must end in the destruction of our liberties." I'm going to get to some Federalists during the ratification debates in just a moment, but I wanted to point to George Washington. In his farewell address, he addressed consolidation as well, but under the idea of the spirit of encroachment. This is a recognition that people with power tend to just always try to expand their power. And this is what's called a spirit of encroachment. People who have power in the executive branch may want to do stuff that has been properly delegated to the legislative branch, or vice versa. And then maybe all of the branches in Washington, D.C. might want to encroach on the powers that were reserved to the states or to the people. And that spirit of encroachment, George Washington warned, tends to consolidate the powers of all the departments in one, and thus to create, whatever the form of government, a real despotism. And here's Brutus in his first paper again. He's recognizing that this is what they're being told. He knew they weren't trying to create a completely consolidated system. So some of the arguments in response, it's almost as if they're ignoring what Brutus was saying, and some of the others, Cato and others, because they weren't arguing that the system in and of itself, what was put down on paper, was intending to create a single government over the whole country, but they just thought over time it would create a giant centralized state. Here's how Brutus put it: "Although the government reported by the convention does not go to a perfect and entire consolidation, it approaches so near to it that it must, if executed, certainly and infallibly terminate in it." Patrick Henry, on the 7th of June the following year in Virginia, he said, "This, sir," again, I don't think he's even taking the same position as Brutus here, that it's really so close that it's going to end up that way. Patrick Henry's pointing out that over time, and many of the Anti-Federalists said, well, you've got all these undefined powers, poorly defined things like general welfare and necessary and proper. And over time, people with power are going to read these in ways to expand their power. And of course, it's going to end up as a consolidated monster. And I think they called it. He said, this, sir, must naturally terminate in a consolidation. If this will do for other people, it will never do for me. James Madison, I think, really makes just an important point, though. He's arguing, of course, with Patrick Henry in the Virginia ratification debates. This is in June 6, 1788, also with George Mason. And he's saying, no, this is a partial consolidation. But if we did this, it would be totally consolidated. And of course, this would be a huge problem. Check it out. Had the government been completely consolidated, the Senate would have been chosen by the people in their individual capacity in the same manner as the members of the other house. Now, of course, that was more than a century before the 17th Amendment, but James Madison, basically, it was just one step away from being completely consolidated. I think some people who are more honest about what they were trying to do and saying, look, we don't want a totally consolidated system, but we need some consolidation. They really believed that they could pull off this kind of high wire act. And others on the anti-federalist side were saying, no, not a chance. But here's Madison himself pointing out, like, look, if they just the bulwark against having a totally consolidated system was making sure that the people in the Senate represented the states and not the people in the states as it is in the House of Representatives. And I think we're very close to that, if not exactly there, after passage of the 17th Amendment.
Last week on our show, we asked, what kind of country allows itself to be invaded, by migrants, just let anybody in. This week, we're asking what kind of country bankrupts itself at ever greater speeds. I mean, I remember going to school. I don't remember learning in school that, our amazing U.S. Constitution says, oh, yeah, just let anybody in, give them free stuff, and let them vote, so they can vote for more free stuff, or to spend money beyond their means so that they ultimately can't even pay the interest and eventually go bankrupt and default. I don't remember learning this stuff in school about government. I heard about checks and balances. I remember that. Where did that go? So what is it? Why is our government like this? And my guess is it's desperation. They are frantically trying to achieve an unachievable goal, which is ruling the world. And this is their goal. This is not our goal as a people. They want to subjugate the world to, so it does, the rules-based order, as it's called. And again, none of this is in our Constitution, which they swear to uphold when they get into office, having 1,000 bases all over, endless wars. What do you think this Ukraine is all about? This has nothing to do with us. Nobody's bothering us over here, or the Middle East, or maybe someday Taiwan. This is all this crazy goal of wanting to rule the world, which goes back. Everybody's tried it. So now America is taking its crack and getting the same exact results. It's failing out there, but even, at the same exact time, it's destroying what's happening here. And that needs to change.
All this mess is looked at by the Federal Reserve. They realize they never reach their goals, that they are there, and they have to have periods of time. Every month they come out with a report and try to convince the people to be optimistic. And in many ways, they're pretty successful at that for the marketplace. But the market loves the inflation. So with all this confusion and mess, instead of going back to a market operation that would allow the market to decide what interest rates should be and what should be done in the economy, rather than fudging it with the government help and largesse. But so in all this, the Fed say, we're ready, in spite of all this inflation around, we'll cut rates for you. Now, that doesn't mean that cutting rates is bad. It just means that they're doing something they don't have the vaguest idea whether it's right or wrong. They don't know whether to cut it 0.5% or 2% and all this stuff. It's all fibbing, and people know about it. And I think the people who take advantage of it know about it too, but they take advantage of it on the short run. So stocks go up. But with all this mess, the Fed says, we're not, the market is turning down, so we have to manage the market, and they don't like high interest rates. So we have to lower the rates. We can't let the rates increase like that. So people depend on the Fed for the guidance in the economy, and of course, the people in Congress and the government are clapping hands. They're really happy about this because the spending continues. And this recent bill they passed, huge bill, a lot of unnecessary spending, and it went sailing through with Republicans and Democrats supporting it. And that is what is going to continue. The welfare warfare state is alive and well, and anybody seriously challenge it you can get into big trouble. People who in high positions, if they challenge the military-industrial complex, it's very dangerous to that person's life. And also in the welfare state, if you do anything, he's going to immediately tomorrow. You won't have your you won't have your Social Security check. So it demagogues it and it work. But of course, the Social Security, no matter what you do, is going to self-destruct because it's a Ponzi scheme, and they have to cut back, and they already have, because the people that have been living on their Social Security, they come along and give them cost of living increases, but they never can keep up with the cost of living because they're still printing money. So it's a system that doesn't work. It will not be cured by tinkering. It is only going to be cured when people admit it doesn't work. Interventionism and Keynesianism doesn't work, and it will only be when we think that maybe the founders had a little bit of advice for us, have sound money and limited government's interference in the marketplace. Maybe we would get somewhere with that.
It's for sure, Dr. Paul. And the founders, the U.S. Constitution was meant to chain down the power of government. Well, those chains have been broken long ago. We have the biggest government in the history of the world, not just in the world, in the history of the world. I found out this last week, I think it was, that the federal government employs 23 million people. That is incredible. That is the size of a state. They could federal government employees can have their own state. That's how big it is. And they extract trillions and trillions of dollars from us per year in taxes, but that's not even enough because they run deficits. They're 34 trillion in debt. So the problem in our society is clearly not us, the people. We're doing our jobs. We pay our taxes. Thank goodness we have each other. There's people that will feed me. If something breaks in my house, they'll come out and fix it. The problem is not in the country itself. The problem is in Washington, D.C.
So I think there's enough known about the principles of liberty to really improve, our system of government. The problem is, once again, more people have to be, once they're convinced of this, to be promoters of this philosophy, because what is coming is not going to be good. And it's a lot easier to start these wars. It's a lot harder to get out of these wars without a lot of tragedy. And that's what we're thinking right now. The most recent one is Ukraine. We sneaked into that war, precipitated it, with participating in a coup. And now look at us on, and everybody's giving up. The Ukrainians can't win, but we have to keep sending money. We maybe have to send some troops and all that. That is a bunch of nonsense. It's going to end, and it will lead to the anarchy that they blame libertarians would bring about by having less government. The answer to it is not more government. The answer to it is having limited government to protect liberty, not to manage all of our affairs. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Man's mind is his basic tool of survival. Life is given to him, survival is not. His body is given to him, its sustenance is not. His mind is given to him, its content is not. Reason does not work automatically. Thinking is not a mechanical process. The connections of logic are not made by instinct. The function of your stomach, lungs, or heart is automatic. The function of your mind is not. In any hour and issue of your life, you are free to think or to evade that effort. But you are not free to escape from your nature, from the fact that reason is your means of survival. So that for you, who are a human being, the question to be or not to be is the question to think or not to think. Man cannot survive except by gaining knowledge, and reason is his only means to gain it. Reason is the faculty that perceives, identifies, and integrates the material provided by his senses. His senses tell him only that something is, but what it is must be learned by his mind. All thinking is a process of identification and integration. Man perceives a blob of color. By integrating the evidence of his sight and his touch, he learns to identify it as a solid object. He learns to identify the object as a table. He learns that the table is made of wood. He learns that the wood consists of cells. that the cells consist of molecules, that the molecules consist of atoms. All through this process, the work of his mind consists of answers to a single question. What is it? His means to establish the truth of his answers is logic. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. An atom is itself, and so is the universe. To arrive at a contradiction is to confess an error in one's thinking. To maintain a contradiction is to abdicate one's mind and to evict oneself from the realm of reality. Truth is the recognition of reality. Reason, man's only means of knowledge, is his only standard of truth. Man's reason is his moral faculty. A process of reason is a process of constant choice in answer to the question, true or false, right or wrong. Is a seed to be planted in soil in order to grow? Right or wrong? Is a man's wound to be disinfected in order to save his life? Right or wrong? Does the nature of atmospheric electricity permit it to be converted into kinetic power? Right or wrong? It is the answers to such questions that gave you everything you have. And the answers came from a man's mind. A mind of intransigent devotion to that which is right. A rational process is a moral process. You may make an error at any step of it with nothing to protect you but your own severity. Or you may try to cheat, to fake the evidence and evade the effort of your quest. But if devotion to truth is the hallmark of morality, then there is no greater, nobler, more heroic form of devotion than the act of a man who assumes the responsibility of thinking. That which you call your soul or spirit is your consciousness. And that which you call free will is your mind's freedom to think or not. Thinking is man's only basic virtue, from which all the others proceed, and his basic vice, the source of all his evils, is that nameless act which all of you practice, but struggle never to admit. The act of blanking out, the refusal to think. Not blindness, but the refusal to see.